Hello, and welcome to the Sleep Haunt. If you're new here, please subscribe and like the video to support the channel. You can also support us by sending a super thanks on this video. Your support truly helps the channel grow. Now, relax and enjoy the story.
Story number 1. The fog rolled in so quietly that Earl did not notice it at first. It began as a faint blur along the tree line, a softening of distant shapes beyond the guardrail. His rig hummed steadily along the two-lane highway, high beams stabbing into what still looked like ordinary night. The dashboard glowed with gentle amber light, gauges steady. The slow, rhythmic sigh of the air breaks a kind of mechanical breathing that kept him company. He was 3 hours into the graveyard stretch through a sparsely populated mountain corridor, the kind of road that looked almost identical for 50-60 miles at a time. Pines huddled close to the shoulders, their tops lost in darkness. The occasional green highway sign flashed by, briefly illuminated and then swallowed again. Mile 217, mile 218. The numbers ticked upward, quiet proof that he was indeed moving forward through the night. Earl liked these hours. There was a privacy to them, a gentle hush that settled into the cab. The world outside narrowed to the corridor of light between his headlights, the white lines pulsing beneath him like a slow heartbeat. A thermos of coffee sat in the cup holder, its lid off, faint curls of steam coiling up and dissolving. Somewhere above the windshield, a dog-eared photograph of his granddaughter swayed slightly before settling back against the cab wall. When the fog reached him, it did so as a gradual thickening. The air beyond the glass took on a milky sheen, muting the sharp edges of the road. His high beams began to bloom out against nothing, light trapped and folded back on itself. Earl leaned forward a little, fingers tightening around the wheel. He flicked the headlights to low, as training and habit insisted. The world shrank further. The white line to his left and the rumble strip to his right became his anchors in a sea of cotton. He turned the radio down to a murmur. The crackle of some distant station faded into faint music, then into static. He tried the CB, cycling through a few channels. A lone voice mentioned a way station 2 states over. Then silence. The highway felt emptied behind and ahead of him, as if his rig were the only thing moving through that suspended gray world. The fog thickened into something almost tangible. It pressed against the windshield, beads of moisture feathering outward, wipers whispering back and forth in a steady, measured arc. Earl flicked his eyes from mirror to mirror, but the side views showed nothing at all, no tail lights, no reflected glow of his own beams, just flat gray. The road, usually a ribbon guiding him forward, had become a narrow tunnel of visibility. Beyond that, the night had no distance. A sign appeared out of the whiteness without warning, jumping into existence just at the edge of his low beams. Mile 221. He nodded to himself, logging the number away. He had been expecting a small gas stop around 225, an all-night place with good coffee and a gravel lot where he could stretch his legs. 4 miles, he thought, maybe 5. The clock on the dash clicked another minute forward. The heater hummed softly. The truck's engine was a constant low thunder beneath him, familiar as the sound of his own voice. In the fog, that consistency was comforting. A faint glow appeared ahead, diffuse and yellowish through the mist. Earl's shoulders relaxed a fraction. That would be a porch light, maybe the edge of the gas station sign bleeding through the fog. As he drew closer, shapes ghosted into view. The sloped roof of a small diner, the squat outline of gas pumps capped with buckets to show they were out of order. A weathered sign with missing letters swung lazily, chains creaking so faintly that he might have imagined the sound through the glass. He slowed instinctively, glancing at the clock. The place looked closed, no cars in the small gravel lot, no movement behind the broad windows. Still, a pale glow burned inside, as if someone had left a row of under-cabinet lights on. The neon open sign in the front window was dark. He passed it by, easing back up to highway speed. The rig climbed a slight grade, the engine note deepening under the strain. The diner receded into the rear view, swallowed almost instantly by the fog. For a moment he thought he saw a single figure standing near the pumps, washed out and indistinct, like a shadow shaped from the mist itself. Then the road curved, and the image was gone. Mile 221 flashed by again. Earl blinked. His foot eased off the accelerator. The sign loomed up from the fog in the same spot on the shoulder. Same angle, same small bend in the guardrail just beyond it. Mile 221. He glanced at the clock. Barely 8 minutes had passed since he had first noted the number. That was not enough time to loop back, not without turning around, and he certainly had not done that. He told himself he had misread it the first time. Maybe it had been 211, numbers blurred on long drives. He hunched closer to the glass, scanning the shoulder. The landscape was a vague suggestion. The dark smear of tree line, the pale tilt of rock. Everything looked the same in the fog anyway. The glow appeared ahead again. The same diffuse yellow, bleeding outward like a small sunrise trapped in milk. The same sloped roof. The same motionless pumps. Earl's skin prickled along his arms. The neon sign in the window was dark. The small interior lights glowed just warmly enough to sketch the outline of tables and a counter inside. A single napkin dispenser caught the dim light, like a small metallic eye. He slowed more this time, letting the truck roll past at a deliberate pace. His eyes searched for differences, something to prove this was another diner, another closed stop with the same anonymous architecture. But there it was. The missing letters on the hanging sign, the faint suggestion of a hand-painted pie poster taped crookedly to the window. And there, by the pump closest to the road, stood a shape. It was a man in a dark jacket, cap pulled low, hands tucked into his pockets as if warding off a chill. He was utterly still. Earl's lights washed over him, and for a moment the figure seemed less solid than the truck's hood, as if the beams passed not through but somehow around him. The man did not raise a hand, did not look up, yet Earl had the unnerving sensation of being noticed. He passed by, the figure vanishing into the fog behind him. His hands felt damp on the steering wheel. Mile 221 slid past for the third time. The fog pressed closer now, heavy and almost sound-absorbing. The truck's engine seemed quieter, the world reduced to a hum, a heartbeat, the soft squeak of the seat as he shifted. The radio hissed with a low, continuous static. Then, out of that static, a voice emerged. It was faint, warped, as if traveling a very long distance. "Anybody eastbound this stretch?" Earl reached for the CB mic quickly, his fingers bumping against it before closing around the worn plastic. He clicked the button. "Copy that, eastbound here. Where you at, driver?" Only static answered. He waited, the road sliding by beneath him, eyes flicking between the windshield and the glowing green numbers on the sign he knew, with growing certainty, was about to appear. "Mille 221." The voice slipped through again, closer this time, yet strangely thin. "Fog's bad tonight. Can't seem to get out of it. Tell me about it," Earl muttered before thumbing the mic again. "You on 7 East, passing the old diner?" Silence, for a heartbeat. Then, "Been passing that same place. Feels like all night." The hair on the back of his neck lifted. Earl swallowed. "You see a fellow by the pumps?" A pause. The static rose and fell like breathing. "Yeah, he don't look at me. Never looks at me." As the fog parted just enough to reveal the diner again, Earl felt the uncanny sensation of his reality and the unseen drivers aligning, like two overlapping photographs. The building, the dim glow, the still figure. He slowed to a crawl this time, hazard lights blinking softly in the mist. He could feel his pulse in his throat. The road behind him was empty. The road ahead was empty. The fog made the world feel enclosed, as if they were all sealed into a small, self-contained space. Earl, his truck, the unseen voice on the radio, and that solitary figure by the pumps. He pulled onto the shoulder, tires crunching softly over gravel. The rig settled with a low shudder, air brake sighing. For a moment he simply sat, engine idling, watching the man through the windshield. The figure did not move. The fog curled around him, parting and rejoining, as if reluctant to touch him. Earl raised the mic again. "What's your handle, driver?" The answer came slowly, the name sounding old-fashioned, a little out of place on a modern road. They called me Red, back when the company colors were, well, long time ago now. Earl hesitated. Something in the way he said it did not sit quite right. You broke down out here, Red? Another pause. Then, almost wistful. Been out here a while. Can't seem to catch the off-ramp. Earl's gaze drifted back to the man by the pumps. The cap, the jacket, the posture of someone who had been standing in one place for too long. A thought rose, unbidden. Maybe Red was not in a truck at all. Maybe Red was wherever that man was, caught between highway and haven, in this endless loop of fog and closed doors. He startled at the idea, even as some deeper part of him recognized the shape of it. Drivers told stories. Lonely nights made good soil for strange tales. Yet, this felt less like a story and more like stepping into one. He did something then that he could not quite explain, even to himself later. Moving slowly, as if not to startle anyone himself, most of all he reached forward and turned off his headlights. For a moment, the world inside the cab remained a small, safe cocoon of dashboard glow. Outside, the fog became a pale, shapeless wall. The diner's interior lights glimmered faintly, the only points of reference now. In that dimness, the figure by the pumps seemed to stand out more clearly, outlined not by illumination, but by contrast, a silhouette where the fog refused to be. Red, Earl said softly into the mic, voice steadier than he felt. Maybe you ought to go inside and get warm. The static deepened, then thinned, like someone adjusting distance. When the voice came back, it sounded closer. Somehow, though it was still faint as breath on glass. Doors locked. Try again, Earl said, eyes on the distant dark shape by the pumps. Give it a knock. Tell him you're ready to move on. He did not know who them was. The words came from someplace deeper than conscious thought, threaded through with years of watching lonely figures at roadside stops, of knowing that sometimes all someone needed was an invitation, a bit of permission to leave whatever had held them. Out near the pumps, the silhouette shifted. It was a small movement, just the incline of a head toward the diner's entrance. The figure turned, shoulders angling, and took one slow step toward the building, then another. The fog swirled, reluctant or relieved, it was impossible to say. Earl held his breath. The silhouette reached the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, very slowly, the faintest suggestion of the interior light brightened, as if a curtain had been drawn back on the inside. The figure stepped forward and seemed to blend with that glow, dissolving not in a dramatic flash, but in a gentle, almost tender fading away. In the cab, the CB hissed softly. Guess they finally heard me knock, Red's voice said, thinner now, as if traveling from much farther away. Thanks, driver. The words lingered in the air like the last notes of a song. Earl waited, the engine idling, his own breathing loud in his ears. He could feel the fog around the cab, no longer pressing, but loosening, like a hand easing its grip. Very slowly, he reached forward and clicked the headlights back on. The beams cut through a thinning veil of mist. The diner's windows were dark now, interior lights extinguished. The pump stood empty. There was no figure by the road, no trace of anyone at all. He merged back onto the highway, the fog receding with each mile. It clung in patches to the low places, then finally lifted altogether, revealing a sky smudged with the first hints of dawn. The white line unwound steadily ahead. The radio found a station again, some old song about the road playing softly. As the sun began to stain the horizon with pale gold, a green sign appeared on the shoulder. Mile 225. Earl let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, and allowed a small, thoughtful smile to touch the corners of his mouth. He did not tell anybody about the loop of fog or the diner that kept reappearing. Not at the next truck stop, not in the lot where he finally parked and stretched, feeling the ache of the night settle into his bones. It seemed like a private thing, a quiet kindness shared between strangers on a lonely stretch of highway. But afterward, whenever he heard someone on the CB mention a foggy night and a stretch of road that seemed to repeat itself, Earl would listen a little closer. And somewhere out there, along a certain mountain corridor, drivers would sometimes swear that the mist thickened around mile 221, and that if they looked closely through the soft, enclosing gray, they could just make out the outline of an old diner and a figure by the pumps, waiting to be noticed. Story number 2. By the time Mariah reached the river valley, the fog had stopped behaving like weather and started feeling like a place. It had begun innocently enough, a pearly haze clinging to the roadside ditches as she rolled south on Highway 34. The night was cool and windless, the kind of late autumn darkness that seemed to drink in every bit of color. Her truck's dash cast a soft green glow over her face and hands, gauges steady, the digital clock ticking steadily toward 2:17 a.m. The route was familiar on the map but new under her tires. This was her first solo run through the valley. Ahead, the highway eased down out of the hills in long, gradual curves. Pines gave way to bare-limbed cottonwoods and tangled underbrush, all flattened into gray silhouettes by the deepening fog. Mariah could taste moisture in the air inside the cab, a faint metallic tang mingling with the smell of stale coffee and the clean, dusty scent of upholstery. Her rig hummed on. A self-contained world in motion. Everything she owned for the week stacked neatly in the sleeper behind her. The radio had gone silent a few miles back. The last clear thing she'd picked up was a weather bulletin from a distant station. Patchy, dense fog in low-lying areas. Use caution. After that, just faint music dissolving into static, like a song someone had once played and then forgotten. She flicked on the fog lights and dropped a few miles per hour. The world beyond her windshield softened, losing sharp edges. Reflective signs bloomed out of the mist and slipped past like cautious ghosts. On her right, a green board slid into view, its white letters beating with moisture in her beams. Riverbridge Valley, next 14 miles. She'd been warned about this stretch during driver orientation. The river made its own weather, they'd said. Fog could come and go in layers, in pockets, sometimes thick enough to hide the taillights of the vehicle ahead of you. Keep a safe distance. Watch your speed. Trust the road markings more than your eyes. The first real wave of fog hit at the valley floor. One moment she could see a quarter-mile ahead. The next the highway seemed to fold into itself, the visible distance shrinking to a dim tunnel of pavement bounded by solid walls of white. Her high beams only turned the mist into a bright, impenetrable glow. She dropped them to low, watched the twin cones of light settle, then dull, as if swallowed. Mariah leaned forward slightly, hands tightening on the wheel. The soft hum of the engine and the faint hiss of air through the vents became louder in the silence. The tires thrummed gently against the asphalt seams. Wipers squeaked every few seconds, smearing away tiny droplets that formed faster than they could be cleared. The fog felt thick, not just in front of the truck but around it, above it. It deadened sound in an odd way. Even the familiar rattle of dishes in the cabinet behind her seemed distant. The nearest world was her cab, the dashboard, the wheel. Outside, everything was reduced to the pale glimmer of the white line, the occasional reflective marker glowing like an eye in the roadside grass. Her GPS screen glowed on the dash, an island of clarity. A neat blue line traced the highway as it wound through the valley, arcing toward a tiny icon of an iron bridge that spanned a ribbon of blue, the river itself. ETA to the next truck stop. 1 hour, 16 minutes. She checked her mirrors. Both side views reflected nothing but fog, thick and uniform, a blank gray that could be 2 feet deep or 2 miles. No headlights behind her. No indication that anyone else existed on the road. That was when the CB crackled to life. Southbound on 34? You got your ears on? The voice was male, steady, edged with a kind of practiced calm. It sounded a little distant, as if it were traveling through more than just wires and air. Mariah startled, then grabbed the mic, thumb brushing the worn push-to-talk button. "Yeah, I hear you," she said, surprised at how small her own voice sounded in the cab. "Southbound through Riverbridge. Who's this?" A brief pause, filled with soft static. "Call me Hank. You're heading into the soup there." She swallowed a nervous laugh. "Already in it, feels like. Can barely see the hood ornament. "Keep her between the lines and don't trust what you think you see off to the sides," the voice said, mild, like someone offering directions around a construction zone. "Valley likes to play tricks at night." Mariah glanced at the GPS again. The tiny truck icon crept closer to the bridge. Through the windshield, fog pressed harder, brightening in her headlights, then dimming. The road had narrowed to the certainty of the white line on her left and the faint suggestion of a rumble strip on her right. Beyond that, nothing. "Appreciate the warning, Hank," she said. "You up ahead somewhere? Been up ahead, been behind. Depends who you ask." There was a note of something like humor in his tone, but it carried a strange distance. "You just stick to the main span when you reach it. Don't let that old road tempt you." The hair along her arms prickled. She hadn't seen any old road. Her eyes flicked from the windshield back to the glowing GPS. The map had shifted slightly, zooming out on its own, showing a spidery network of pale gray lines. Her planned route was solid blue, simple and direct. But there, faintly, she saw it. A thin, faded thread branching off just before the river, curving down and across on a smaller bridge, then rejoining the highway on the far bank. The labeling was tiny. She leaned closer. "Old River Road, decommissioned." Her hand tightened on the wheel, knuckles paling in the dashboard's glow. "I'm just following the GPS," she said. "Says I'm on 34. One bridge coming up." Soft static crackled for a moment, like a quiet sigh. "That box ever show you things that aren't there?" Hank asked. A shape loomed suddenly in the fog ahead, a massive, dark outline taking form only as she came within a handful of truck lengths. The river bridge. Steel girders rose into the mist, their tops hidden, the structure dissolving upward. The guardrails glistened with damp. A pair of blinking amber hazard lights marked the entrance, their reflection doubling in a surface she could not see. She slowed, easing onto the span. The sound of the road changed subtly, a faint hollow echo under the wheels as steel and concrete replaced solid earth. The fog seemed denser here, hugging close to the rails, drifting back in soft curls. She felt more than saw the drop on either side. Only then did she notice that, parallel to the bridge she'd taken, another shape ghosted out of the mist a little lower and a little to the right. For a heartbeat, as her truck eased past a gap in the girders, she glimpsed it. A narrower, older bridge, its railings lower, steel darker with rust, no lights marking its path. The fog wrapped it tight, smudging its lines, but there was no mistaking it. An older road, an older way across. "I see it," Mariah said quietly into the mic. "There's another bridge down there. Some folks still take it," Hank said, his voice softer now. "Habit, maybe. Or they're following directions printed when that road was younger. On nights like this, they swear they're on the main span, till they feel the boards under their tires." She listened to the hum of her engine, the gentle hiss of air, the faint rattle of something shifting in the sleeper. Underneath it all, there was another sound now, a low, distant rush, like wind through tall grass. The river, hidden somewhere below, moving steadily along in its own dark world. "How long you been running this valley?" she asked, more to hear another human voice than for information. "Long enough to know when it's best not to stop," he answered. "Fog holds on to things down here. Headlights, voices, folks' worries. Easy to get turned around in your own mind when you can't see more than a couple truck lengths." Halfway across the bridge, the world narrowed further. The fog grew almost luminous, a soft, milky brightness with no clear source. Her low beams were like weak pens drawing onto cotton. The guardrails blurred. The rivets on the steel supports appeared and disappeared as they slid past, momentary constellations in the gray. For a moment, she felt the eerie sensation of movement halting at the truck, the bridge. Her own breath had all suspended, and that only the fog moved, slowly, around her. The dashboard clock seemed stuck between minutes. The GPS animation froze. "Hey," she said, pulse picking up. "You still there?" Static. Then slowly, "Just keep steady. Southbound. Bridge gets strange in the middle. Time goes thin here." Her left hand flexed on the wheel. She focused hard on the faint, rhythmic rise and fall of the white line, on the soft vibration of the engine through the floor, on the familiar smell of diesel and vinyl, and the citrus hand sanitizer clipped near the console. Real things. Present things. Something flickered in her peripheral vision. A pale shape sliding along the older bridge below, almost in tandem with her truck. She did not want to look, but she did. Down in the fog, level with the lower span, she saw the shadow of another rig. No lights glowed on its cab, no markers shone along the trailer. It moved as a darker absence within the mist, matching her speed, the shape of it vaguely old-fashioned rounded corners, shorter nose, the kind you saw in photographs from decades back. For an instant she thought she saw a face in its side window, turned toward her, features blurred by distance and fog and time. Her heart hammered. She jerked her gaze back to the lane. Her truck held true. Hank's voice floated back in, calmer than her own thoughts. "Don't look too long. They get curious when someone sees them." "Who?" she whispered before she could stop herself. The answer came after a small, weighty pause. "The one still driving the old road." They said it lightly. In training, the valley had a history. A few bad nights, years apart, when fog and timing and misjudgment lined up wrong. But this felt different, less like danger, more like residue, like the way a song might linger in a room after the radio turned off. The GPS screen blinked and came back to life. The tiny truck icon crawled forward again. The digital clock ticked to the next minute. Without noticing when it happened, Mariah realized she could see the far end of the bridge now just barely. A darker threshold ahead where the fog grew a little thinner, tinged with the suggestion of trees beyond. She exhaled, not remembering when she'd last taken a full breath. "Almost there," Hank said. "Fog'll let go a bit once you're clear of the water. Pull over in the next turnout if you need to. Stretch. Let your head catch up with your wheels." "You up at that turnout?" she asked. "Be nice to say hello in person." An odd stillness answered. Then, "I'll be around. Just listen for me when the river's talking. Keep it between the lines southbound." She watched the end of the bridge draw nearer. The old, lower span vanished into the fog at some unseen juncture. One moment there was a darker smudge below and to the right. The next there was nothing but soft, roiling gray. Her own tires rolled onto solid ground, the subtle echo of the bridge's deck fading back into the more familiar thrum of asphalt. Just like that, the fog thinned. It did not vanish entirely, but lifted in ragged curtains, revealing hints of forest on either side, the faint outline of a roadside marker, the night sky above like a deep, closed hand. She could see at least a few hundred yards now. Her ribs loosened around her lungs. The next turnout appeared on the right, a simple gravel pull-off with a battered trash can and a wooden post bearing a faded map of the valley. No other vehicles occupied it. She slowed, signaled out of habit, and eased in, the truck settling with a sigh. She left the engine idling, the cab warm around her. "Appreciate the company, Hank," she said into the mic. "You take care out there." Only static returned. She waited a moment, then another. No answering voice. The channel was as silent as if she had never spoken. She set the mic back in its cradle, fingers lingering for a heartbeat on the plastic. Outside, the fog drifted in slow, torn bands across the turnout, curious but not pressing. Crickets chirped somewhere in the wet grass, their sound oddly sharp after the muffled quiet on the bridge. On impulse, she dug her phone out of the console and pulled up a browser. A search bar glowed. She typed, "Riverbridge Valley, Old Bridge, Hank CB." Results swam up. Local history pages, a newspaper archive, a blog by a retired trucker. She tapped one. A grainy black and white photo loaded the valley, the river, the old, lower bridge still in use. In the foreground, a truck rolled across it, rounded corners, short nose. The logo on the door was half familiar in its shape, though the company that had owned it had changed names more than once since then. Underneath, a caption. It mentioned fog and the dangers of old infrastructure, and a driver who'd been known on the CB by the handle Hank, who'd spent years helping others through the valley before. One especially dense night, his rig never made the far bank. The article was careful, factual, undramatic. There were no details beyond that, just dates and encouragements to respect the weather. Mariah sat back, listening to the low, steady hum of her engine, the faint tick of cooling metal from somewhere deep in the dash. She looked out through the windshield, into the slow shifting of fog and shadow. She did not feel afraid, precisely. The chills along her skin were mild, almost companionable, like cool air through a slightly open window on a warm night. The valley felt occupied, yes, but not with anything malicious, just with memories that had taught themselves how to move. She finished her coffee from the thermos, let the quiet settle in her bones, then eased the truck back onto the highway. The fog followed for a time, then hung back, content to watch her taillights recede. In her mirrors, the mist glowed faintly, like breath on a sleeping world. From then on, whenever her route took her through River Bridge Valley, the CB would sometimes crackle as she reached the edge of the fog. A calm, steady voice might offer a reminder to mind her speed, to watch for the old road, to keep her mind from wandering too far where sight could not follow. And somewhere below, on certain nights, drivers swore they could just make out the shadow of another rig pacing them on a lower, older span, keeping company across the dark water until the land rose up again, and the fog, satisfied, let them go. Story number 3. By midnight, the highway had turned into a narrow ribbon floating in a world made of milk. Lena had watched the fog grow from a low, ghostly sheen above the harvested cornfields into thick, breathing walls that pressed in close to the glass. At first it had been pretty the way the headlights caught each drifting strand, how the beams carved careful tunnels through it. Then the last farmhouse light disappeared behind her, and the night seemed to fold shut. Her rig hummed along Interstate 27, somewhere between small Midwestern towns she only knew as names on the dispatch sheet. The radio had gone to hiss. The last station faded out 10 miles ago. The CB was quiet. Even the usual distant glow of other traffic was gone. Her world had shrunk to the cab, the dashboard's gentle green wash, and 100 feet of pavement ahead. She trusted the markings more than her eyes now. The white line on her right rose and fell in a slow rhythm, guiding her forward. Reflective posts along the median appeared one by one, like cautious sentries, then slipped away into the fog. She eased back to 50, careful and steady, the engine's low purr, a kind of lullaby that made her jaw loosen and her thoughts go soft around the edges. The coffee in her travel mug had turned lukewarm. Her shoulders ached. A faint, insistent pressure reminded her she'd been putting off a bathroom break for too many miles. She glanced at the digital clock. 12:06 a.m. The map in her head ticked forward, checking off what she knew from the route plan. There should be a state rest area somewhere around mile 93. As if answering, a green sign slid out of the fog on the right, its white letters pearled with moisture in her beams. Rest area, 2 miles. Relief loosened something in her chest. 2 miles was nothing. She could almost feel the stillness of the parking lot, the simple comfort of fluorescent-lit bathrooms, the hiss of an ancient soda machine. 10 minutes off the road to stretch and breathe air that didn't smell like truck upholstery and fuel and the faint citrus of her hand sanitizer. The fog thickened perceptibly, like the slow turn of a dimmer switch. Her low beams glowed back at her. Droplets formed tiny, glowing universes on the glass. The wipers murmured across the windshield, clearing arcs that blurred almost as soon as they were made. Somewhere beyond that softness, cornfield stubble and fence posts and bar ditches waited, erased for now. She leaned forward, peering into the whiteness for the exit sign. It should be on the right, with that comforting, familiar graphic of the little building and trees. She felt the slightest vibration under her tires, the seams in the pavement ticking by. The minutes stretched, the highway unspooled. No sign appeared. Her bladder throbbed, annoyance mingling with a thin thread of unease. She checked the odometer, not precise, but enough to tell her she'd gone at least 2 miles since the last marker. Maybe 3. Had she missed it? In this fog, it wouldn't take much. One slow blink at the wrong time. She slowed another 5 miles per hour, hazard lights winking softly into the mist. A lone, reflective marker flashed back at her. Mile 93, then was gone. The ramp should be here. She glared into the blur, fingers tightening on the wheel. The shoulder on the right loomed out of nowhere, merged with the dark smear of a drainage ditch, then vanished. She saw no break in the guardrail. No comforting sign. Just more fog. More featureless gray. More road that seemed almost to loop back into itself. For a heartbeat, the absurd image came to her of driving in place, the world rolling like scenery on a stage, the same ditches, the same fields, the same hidden rest area, forever almost, but not quite reached. Her headlights washed over another green rectangle. Restaria, 0 miles. The arrow pointed right, sharp and decisive. She caught only a flash of it, close, too close, but the blue glow of a service building beyond it bled through the fog like a promise. Finally, she muttered, signaling and easing toward the exit ramp. The turnoff appeared at the last moment, a curved slash of darker pavement diving into the thick whiteness. She took it cautiously, the truck's weight settling as she left the main line of the interstate. The sound changed first. The high, steady hiss of highway speed dropped to a low growl as she braked, following the ramp's gentle arc. Gravel crunched faintly under the asphalt somewhere, or maybe it was just the echo of her own tires bouncing off the unseen embankment. The fog closed in even tighter around her, pushed by some small shift in the air. Then the ramp leveled, widened, and she emerged into the rest area lot. It appeared all at once, fully formed out of the fog, a low brick building with a peaked roof, its windows glowing a soft, yellowed white. Rows of parking spaces stretched out in careful, empty lines. A scattering of trees, their bare branches reaching cautiously into the mist. An old-style wooden picnic shelter hunched near the edge of an unseen field, its roof dripping slowly. Lena rolled forward, scanning for other vehicles. A single sedan sat nose out in the car section, its windows fogged from the inside. Farther down, in the truck lane, a box truck was parked at an angle, curtains drawn tight in the sleeper, and, closest to the building, under a lone sodium lamp that hummed softly to itself, was an older cab-over rig the color of oxidized teal. Its chrome was dulled, its logo painted in a style she'd only seen in old photographs. The lot was so still it felt posed. Her engine seemed too loud for it. She eased into a slot a few spaces down from the teal truck and set the brake. The rig sighed, settling. For a long moment, she just sat, listening. The low murmur of the engine, the faint tick of cooling metal, the soft, almost domestic hum of the rest area building's lights beyond the glass. Outside, the fog drifted between the lampposts, turned pale gold where the light caught it. It moved with the slow deliberateness of breath in sleep. She killed the engine. The sudden quiet rang in her ears. Without the rumble, she could hear more. The whir of something mechanical inside the building, maybe an old HVAC unit, the almost imperceptible buzz of the sodium light, a vague, rhythmic rasp like a broom being drawn across terrazzo somewhere out of sight. Lena zipped her jacket, opened the door, and climbed down. The air hit her like cool, damp cloth. It smelled of wet concrete, fallen leaves, and the sharp, clean note of lemon cleaner. Gravel crunched under her boots as she walked toward the light. Up close, the rest area building looked different than the newer ones she'd seen along other interstates. The brick was darker, mottled with age. The wide front windows were framed in heavy metal mullions, and through them she could see glossy tile floors, a row of vending machines with big, old-fashioned logos. The glass in the door was etched with the state's outline and a slogan that matched a logo she remembered from her childhood, not from any recent billboard. Her footsteps echoed softly as she stepped inside. Warmth wrapped around her immediately. The air was a little too heated, tinged with the faint ozone of fluorescent bulbs and that same lemon cleaner. The lights buzzed overhead in long rows. A persistent hum came from the soda machine against the far wall. Somewhere, a radio played so quietly, it was more suggestion than sound. A tinny melody from what might have been an older country song. To her left, the women's restroom door stood open, the tile beyond gleaming. To her right, a small lobby area held a map of the state in a glass case, its highways drawn in bold red and blue. A narrow bulletin board was crowded with neatly pinned flyers, road safety reminders, a faded notice about an open house for the new I-27 bypass, a campaign encouraging motorists to call home tonight, use our pay phones. There were, in fact, 2 payphones mounted on the far wall. Their cords hung obediently, receivers cradled. A shallow tray beneath them held a stack of paper phone books with curled edges. Lena frowned, something soft and unsettled shifting in her chest. She hadn't seen a working highway payphone in years. The restroom was blessedly ordinary. The fluorescent light hummed. A faintly floral air freshener puffed somewhere. Water ran cool and clear from the faucet, tasting of iron and stone and something faintly sweet. In the mirror, her own face looked pale and a bit worn, hair pressed flat by hours under a headset. She studied herself for a heartbeat, seeking some sign that the strangeness outside had touched her. Her reflection only blinked back, tired, but intact. When she stepped back into the lobby, someone was there. The woman stood near the map case, rolling a small-wheeled mop bucket back and forth with absent ease. Her gray hair was pulled into a loose knot at the nape of her neck. A pale blue custodial shirt hung comfortably on her frame, the sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms that spoke of a life of work, not fragility. Her ID badge swung a little as she turned, catching the light Jean. It read in small black letters. "Evenin', Han," she said, as if they'd been expecting each other. Her voice was low and warm, wrapped in some accent that flattened the vowels gently. Fog set in thick out there. Lena managed a small smile. "Yeah, thought I missed the exit for a minute." Jean's eyes crinkled at the corners. They were clear, unhurried, the color of hazel glass bottles. It's easy to drive right on past when it's like soup. Place has a way of holding back until you really need it. The phrasing brushed against Lena's nerves in a way she couldn't quite name. She glanced toward the big front windows. Outside, the fog pressed up against the glass, turned the sodium lights into soft, indistinct halos. The teal cabover truck sat under its lamppost, outlines fuzzed. "How long you been on the road tonight?" Jean asked, dipping the mop back into the bucket. The water made a thick, slow swirl, darker than it should have. "Left the depot around 6, Lena said. "Supposed to make Cedar Falls by dawn." The older woman nodded, as if this matched something she already knew. She crossed to a narrow, unattended counter near the restrooms, where a battered stainless steel thermos and a stack of white foam cups sat. Lena was certain those hadn't been there moments ago. "Coffee?" Jean asked. "It's not truck stop fancy, but it's hot." The smell reached her before the cup did. Rich, dark, with that slightly over-roasted edge of machines that had been brewing the same brand for decades. It triggered an unexpected memory of riding in her dad's pickup as a child, the way gas station coffee had perfumed the cab. "Yes, please," Lena said, accepting the cup. The heat nipped comfortably at her fingers through the foam. She took a careful sip. It was strong and uncomplicated and exactly right. "You keep a logbook?" Jean asked conversationally, wringing out the mop with practiced hands. "Paper or one of them new little screens?" "Electronic," Lena said automatically, glancing at the smartphone in her pocket. For no good reason, she didn't pull it out. Jean smiled to herself, shaking her head. Used to be, drivers spent half their breaks hunched over paper, scribbling and erasing. Always thought they deserved better uses of their 10 minutes. Her tone made it hard to tell whether she was remembering something from last week or from a quarter century ago. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere in the vending bay, a refrigeration unit clicked on with a soft shudder. Lena took another sip of coffee and finally let her curiosity edge forward. "How late do they keep you on here?" "Oh, I keep an eye on things," John said easily. "Especially on nights like this. Folks get turned around in fog. Forget they're tired. Forget they're human, not machines." Her gaze settled on Lena, kind but penetrating. "You've been letting yourself forget that a bit, haven't you?" Heat rose uninvited to Lena's face. It felt absurd that a stranger mopping floors in a lonely rest area could see that much. But the long string of overnight hauls and the skipped meals and the endless coffee had all left a kind of thinness in her that was easy to read, if you knew what to look for. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then softened. "Just a lot of hours this week." Jean nodded, unbothered by the deflection. Sit a spell before you head back out. Let the fog move past. It'll still be there when you're ready, but it won't be quite so hungry for you. Hungry. The word landed and lay there, not menacing exactly, but serious. There were molded plastic chairs against the far wall, the kind that molded slightly to the curve of your back, and then refused to give any more comfort. A faded travel poster above them showed a bright summer lake, children laughing in water that looked almost painted. Lena sank into one of the chairs, coffee cradled between her palms. For a moment she closed her eyes. The sounds of the rest area wrapped around her. The soft swish of the mop, the distant hum of the soda machine, the slow, regular drip of something in the janitor's closet. The thin thread of old music from somewhere, maybe that radio she'd thought she heard, wove through it all. Time lost its sharpness. Minutes stretched and folded into each other like the layers of fog outside. When she opened her eyes again, her coffee was half gone. The lobby looked exactly the same and somehow subtly altered, as if the air had shifted a few degrees cooler. Jean stood by the front windows now, looking out into the whiteness with a small, assessing tilt to her head. "You'll be all right now," she said, without turning. "Fog's lifting off the interstate, just clinging to the low spots like it's supposed to." Lena rose, joints stiff and oddly refreshed at once. "Thanks," she said, "for the coffee and the company. That's what we're here for," Jean replied. "You mind the mile markers. They'll tell you more truth than your clock tonight." On impulse, Lena glanced at the ID badge again, memorizing the name, the way the last name blurred where the lamination had bubbled. "You here most nights?" "Only when I'm needed," Jean said, and the answer was both simple and impossible. Outside, the air had changed. The fog still hugged the trees and lay low over the ground, but the space above the parking lot felt clearer, higher. The sodium lamps cast longer, surer beams. She could see the edges of the lot now, the suggestion of woods beyond. The teal cabover was still parked under its light, but its cab was utterly dark. No glow behind the curtains, no glint of chrome on the mirrors. For a moment, Lena thought she could see all the way through it, the truck's bulk thinner than it should have been, like the suggestion of a vehicle sketched over the night. She blinked, and it was solid again. Her own truck loomed comfortingly real, streaked with moisture, red reflectors winking. She climbed in, set the coffee in its holder, and keyed the ignition. The dash lit up in familiar colors. The clock read 12:08 a.m. She stared at it. That couldn't be right. She was certain she'd been inside longer than 2 minutes. Her shoulders felt looser. The bone-deep fatigue softened in a way that a couple of sips of coffee couldn't explain. But the clock held steady, indifferent. 12:08. As she eased back down the ramp, the rest area receded into the rear view, blurred almost instantly by the fog. The interstate opened before her, its lanes clearer now, fog dissipating into shredded veils. The radio found a station again, faint and crackling, some late-night host chuckling about traffic halfway across the country. Her headlights swept over a sign. "Aristaria, 18 miles." She frowned, glancing at the odometer. It had barely budged. She looked into the mirrors again. The place she just left was gone, swallowed by the gray. Only the black curve of the exit ramp remained, darting off into nothing. She drove on. The fog retreated mile by mile, leaving only low-tucked patches in the fields, small ghosts among the stalks. The night ahead opened. Her eyelids no longer felt as weighted. When dawn's first pale smear finally touched the horizon and the sky went from ink to charcoal, she approached mile 93, again this time from the opposite direction. On her return trip, curiosity had grown in the empty hours. In full daylight, she thought, she could see the rest area clearly, note its name, take a picture of the peculiar old payphones to prove, if only to herself, that it had been as she remembered. The fog was long gone, burned away by a weak sun. The fields lay open and bare to the sky, stubble catching the light like short, bright hair. The interstate stretched straight and unambiguous. The sign appeared on the right. Prestaria, closed. No services. The exit ramp was almost overgrown. A chain hung across its mouth, bolted to two heavy posts, a faded orange "Aria closed" sign sagging in the middle. Beyond it, she caught a glimpse of cracked pavement and a building half hidden by volunteer trees, its windows dark, roofline humped in slight disrepair. No teal truck, no sodium lamps. The old picnic shelter's roof had caved in on one side. A small metal plaque on one of the posts flashed in her peripheral vision as she passed. In the mirror, she could just make out the lettering along its top edge in the brightening light. In memory of those lost in the 1989 fog pileup, Mille Doksanuch. Her grip tightened on the wheel for a breath. The highway hummed beneath her, patient. She did not slow. There was nowhere to turn in, even if she'd wanted to. The closed rest area fell away behind her, swallowed not by fog this time, but by distance and the rising day. Later, parked in a truck stop cafe a state away, Lena would search the name on the plaque as best she could remember it. She'd find an old article about a sudden wall of fog, a chain reaction crash, how the rest area staff helped pull people to safety. There would be a photograph of a woman in a pale blue custodial shirt, smiling, holding a mop handle like a flagpole. The caption would name her. She would not tell anyone about the coffee, or the way time had bent around the lobby chairs, or how her tires had seemed to leave the fog behind without hurry or struggle. Those felt like small, private gifts, a kindness extended across years and weather and whatever mysterious rules governed lonely places. But after that night, whenever the road slipped into fog and the world shrank to the space inside her headlights, Lena would watch the signs a little more closely. And on some dense, quiet stretches, if the CB murmured to life with an old driver mentioning mile 93 and a little pull-off that shows up when it wants to, she would listen and feel an odd, comforting chill along her arms, like cool hands steadying a tired traveler's shoulders before sending her safely on her way. Story number 4. On Highway 19, where the blacktop slipped between low, scrub-covered hills and the outline of the ocean was only a dark suggestion to the west, the fog came in from the water like something with intention. Caleb watched it roll across the distant fields as a pale smudge at first, trailing over wire fences, swallowing the occasional cluster of eucalyptus. His rig's headlights pushed into the thinning night, beams catching each drifting strand. The dash glowed steady blue-green, gauges rock solid, the GPS, a small square of certainty in the cab. It was coming up on 3 a.m., that quiet hour, when even the most stubborn late-night diners turned off their neon and the world seemed to exhale. The cab smelled faintly of coffee, peppermint gum, and the clean, dry scent of the worn steering wheel beneath his hands. The hum of the tires on the asphalt had settled into a low, even note. He knew this stretch on paper. A long glide down from the inland ridge, a few lazy curves, then the old state way station at mile 142. Dispatch had told him it had been decommissioned for years. The new one sat 40 miles north on a different route. A marker on his route sheet simply read, "Old Station, Pass." Outside, the fog reached the highway and simply stayed. It thickened suddenly, a soft wall that smoothed the world into gradients of gray. The high beams only turned it into a bright, unbroken plain, so he dipped to low and flicked on his fog lights. The visible world shrank to a narrow corridor, the pale header of lane lines, the dark suggestion of hillside, the occasional reflector flashing like a watchful eye and then gone. The radio, already faint, dissolved into gentle static. He tried the CB, only a couple of far-off voices talking about weather 2 states away. Then even that fizzled into a quiet hiss. The night pressed closer. The truck became its own cocoon of sound. Engine thrum, faint rattle from the sleeper closet, the whisper of the defroster. Caleb shifted in his seat, one hand abandoning the wheel briefly to rub the back of his neck. The load behind him was paper 40,000 pounds of neat, strapped pallets. He felt every bit of it when the road lifted beneath him, when the grade leaned. Heavy, but legal. Perfectly ordinary. It was the other weight he couldn't quite shake. The image that returned in the quiet moments. The too-tight merge 3 months ago, the rookie mistake, the shudder as his trailer had kissed another rig's mirror. No one hurt, no real damage, just a shower of glass and the white-hot adrenaline of what could have been. the other driver's flat, tired look. "You can't carry that kind of close call around forever, kid," his trainer had said afterward. He had nodded, but some part of him had kept it anyway, tucked into the corners of his thoughts like a stone in the shoe of his mind. A sign loomed up out of the fog on the right, sudden and close. "State, way, station, Birmile, open." He frowned, eyes narrowing. That couldn't be right. He ran through the briefing in his memory. "Old station's shut. You'll see it signed, but it's all closed up, boarded. Just stay on 19. He glanced at the GPS. The little truck icon rolled along the blue line, as if nothing had changed. Another sign appeared. Moisture purled along its edges. "Trucks. Prepare to stop. Open." The word glowed a faint, deep green in his beams, more saturated than the rest. The fog seemed to gather thicker around the post, curling like breath. He lifted his foot, letting the rig decelerate slowly. Habit and regulation nudged at him. If the station was open, you didn't blow past. Fines weren't worth the time saved. Maybe dispatch had old information. Maybe they'd reopened it temporarily. Maybe... He rounded a gentle curve and the way station emerged from the fog like a memory made solid. Banks of yellow sodium lights hummed above a wide concrete apron. The low, boxy scale house sat just off the lane, narrow windows glowing with a warm interior light. The overpass canopy straddled the scale platform itself, its undersides lit in a clean, harsh white that turned the fog into a glowing tunnel. A bright, rectangular sign above the lane said, "Scale open. Please proceed." The letters weren't digital. They were painted and backlit from within, the old-fashioned kind. Caleb's grip tightened on the wheel. He'd seen pictures of these older stations in training. Analog dials, paper logbooks, the solid, boxy architecture of the 80s. The new stations he'd visited on other routes were all glass and LED and sleek modern panels that chirped when your axle weight was off. Here, the windows shone a soft amber, like lamplight in a kitchen. He signaled, eased into the off-ramp lane, and rolled slowly toward the scale, following the arrows painted on the damp concrete. The fog thinned under the canopy, pushed back by the light. The station felt like a little island, suspended in its own pocket of visibility. A red stoplight glowed at the head of the scale. He brought the truck to a halt, air brakes sighing. For a moment, nothing happened. The engine idled. A deep, patient rumble. A drop of water fell from the edge of the canopy and burst into a tiny comet in his headlamps. Then the light flipped to green. "Slowly advance. Watch, signal." The letters were on an old metal flip sign, the kind that rotated physically from one message to another with a faint mechanical clunk. He eased the truck forward until his steer tires were squarely on the first painted mark. The station speakers crackled softly. "Bring her up just a touch more, driver." The voice was male, steady, edged with a kind of unhurried authority. It had the texture of years in it. Caleb complied, creeping until the whole rig sat on the scale platform. The truck settled. The vibrations changed, more resonant, as if the concrete beneath him had a different depth than ordinary roadbed. "Good, hold it there." He put the truck in neutral and set the brake, then sat back, listening. The scale made a faint, low, whirring noise beneath him, like something old but well-maintained coming awake. He imagined big, round dials twitching to life behind the glass, needles swinging. The speaker crackled again. "Why don't you step on up to the window a minute?" It wasn't a request he was accustomed to at modern stations, where lights and screens and automated signs usually did the talking. But there was nothing in the tone to bristle against, no impatience, just a calm that somehow threaded under his skin. He killed the engine, grabbed his logbook and company ID out of habit, and climbed down from the cab. The air under the canopy was cool and faintly metallic. Concrete smelled of rain and old grease. The fog hovered in a loose ring just beyond the halo of lights, as if respecting an invisible boundary. It muffled the sounds of the highway until the night felt almost entirely contained within the station's perimeter. He crossed to the scale house. Through the glass he could see the interior. Scuffed linoleum, a tall counter, a wall clock with big black numbers, the kind found in classrooms and garages. On the back wall, a map of the state hung under plastic. The glow inside was warmer than the hard light outside, softened by a single shaded desk lamp in the corner. A man in a dark green uniform shirt stood behind the counter. His hair was more silver than not, cut short. A patch on his shoulder bore the faded seal of the State Highway Department. His name tag was simple, brass, and old-fashioned. H. Ballard. Ballard smiled, the kind of small, professional smile that had practiced itself over countless night shifts. Evening. Rough fog out there. Up close, Caleb could see faint creases at the corners of his eyes, like maps of years of squinting into weather. His voice matched the one from the speaker, steady and calm, carrying a warmth that sat at odds with the hour. "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "Thought I'd passed this place already, to be honest. Dispatch said it wasn't active anymore." Ballard's smile tilted at one corner. "We open when we're needed." He glanced down at something on the counter that Caleb couldn't quite see. Paper load out of Dalewood, bound for the port. The back of Caleb's neck prickled. "That's right, 40,000 on, give or take. Legal, but you're pulling a bit more than that just now." Ballard lifted his gaze. The observation hung in the air, clearly meaning more than axle weights. Caleb shifted his logbook from one hand to the other. "Scales all right? The old girls still know their business." Ballard tapped the side wall with easy affection, and the building gave a faint, answering vibration that Caleb felt in his shoes. "Numbers are clean. That's not the kind of weight I'm talking about." Outside, a soft breath of wind flowed over the canopy, making the fog beyond thicken and thin in slow pulses. The world beyond the station was just an indistinct glow, no visible highway, no distinguishable horizon. "Been on the road long?" Ballard asked, opening a drawer and pulling out a form. The paper was slightly yellowed, the ink lines crisp. "About a year solo," Caleb said. "Company driver before that. You drive like someone who's been thinking too hard." Ballard's tone carried no accusation, just an odd kind of sympathy. "Braked early, turned in neat. Looked twice at that stoplight even when it turned green. That's someone running never, quite sure they deserve the right to keep going." Caleb blinked. "I had a scare a while back, that's all." Ballard's pen moved across the form, neat and precise. "Out on 81, near the gravel yard?" he asked gently. "Dark pickup in your blind spot. Dry night, but your hands were sweating on the wheel." Caleb's breath stalled. The hum of the station light seemed, for a heartbeat, to lower in pitch, as if leaning closer. He had never mentioned the location when talking about that night. Not to dispatch, not to the mechanic who'd checked the trailer afterward. It had been written up as a minor contact in the report, one of those things that went into a database and then slumbered there under layers of other small infractions. No one but the two drivers, the responding officer and his supervisor, had known how that moment had felt. "How did you—" he started. Ballard held up a placating hand. His eyes were steady, kind. "Scales don't just measure steel and rubber, son. Places like this, they remember. All those long nights, all those trucks, rolling in with more on them than the bill of lading fear. Regret. Wishing you'd slept more. Some of it sticks in the concrete in the walls. Folks like me just learn to read it." A shiver moved lightly along Caleb's spine, not of fear but of being unexpectedly, precisely seen. Outside, a truck whooshed past on the invisible highway, a low, muffled sound like distant surf. The fog held it back from view. Ballard slid the form across the counter. There were no numbers on it, just a simple line, "Driver load," followed by a long blank space. "Company's already got your weight, your log, your ETA," Ballard said. "That's their business. This here's for what you're carrying on the inside. You can write it down if you want, or just stand there and think it real clear. Either way, station records it." Caleb stared at the empty line. The pen felt heavier than it should in his fingers. Somewhere, the clock on the wall ticked with a slow, even patience. He thought of that narrow merge, the hard white stare of the other driver in the aftermath lights, the way his own heart had pounded for hours afterward. He thought of late calls home in which he'd almost mentioned it, then hadn't. Of the way he'd rerun the moment in his mind, each time wondering if a slightly different decision would have changed everything. He didn't write anything elaborate, just 3 words, his handwriting a little too tight. Almost hurt someone. The sentence looked strange on the paper, both smaller and heavier than it felt in his head. Ballard took the form back without reading it. He fed it into a narrow slot in a squat olive-green machine against the wall. The device hummed softly, like an old copier warming up. A small amber light glowed, then faded. The paper vanished from view. "Station's got it now," Ballard said. "Concrete and steel know what you've been toting. That makes it their job to shoulder it for a while. Let you haul what you're meant to haul." Caleb swallowed. "That simple?" "Nothing simple about nights and fog and close calls," Ballard said gently. "But there's no sense in driving circles in your own head forever. Roads got enough curves." He glanced past Caleb toward the truck. "You'll feel her a little lighter for a ways. Don't let that tempt you into speed. It's a freedom, not a license." The clock on the wall read 3:02 a.m. The second hand ticked with unhurried precision. The map on the back wall listed towns whose names he'd only ever heard on weather reports. "Do I owe you anything?" Caleb asked, half smiling despite the peculiar tightness in his chest. "Just your best attention for the next 100 miles, Ballard said. "Keep your eyes gentle but sharp. You'll be through the worst of the fog by mile 150. After that, it's just you and the road, and a good sky." Something about the way he said it made Caleb imagine stars over the highway, even though the fog still lay thick. He thanked the inspector, stepped back into the cool air, and climbed into the truck. The cab smelled faintly different when he settled in, still coffee and dust and fabric, but under that, a trace of something clean, like rain on hot pavement. He turned the key. The engine caught, familiar and reassuring. As he eased off the scale, the truck responded with a subtle lightness, as if some tension in the frame had relaxed. Not enough to change the physics of his load. He knew the difference between unbalanced weight and this. This sat somewhere in him instead. In his mirror, the scale house windows glowed a last, warm amber. Ballard's silhouette stood briefly against the glass, then turned away. The fog curved in around the station's little island of light, but did not cross. Back on the highway, the mist closed in again, but not quite as fiercely. He could see a little farther now, not much, but enough to distinguish the faint shape of a roadside oak here, a leaning fence post there. The center line's rhythm steadied like a heartbeat finding its tempo. The clock on the dash read 3:01 a.m. He blinked, frowned, tapped the glass lightly with a knuckle. The digits didn't flicker. 3:1 glowed calmly back at him. He checked his phone. 3:1. The encounter at the station had felt longer than a minute. He could still taste the metallic cool of the air, still see the neat brass of Ballard's name tag. But the night had its own ideas about how it measured itself. The fog began to thin around mile 150, just as Ballard had said. It peeled back in gentle layers, revealing a sky smudged with low, fast-moving clouds. A pale hint of stars winked through in places. The highway unrolled ahead like a quiet promise. By dawn, he reached a truck stop near the port, a low sprawl of pumps and a building whose windows glittered with the tired cheerfulness of 24-hour commerce. Inside the diner, over eggs and toast that tasted better than they should have, he mentioned the reopened way station to the woman topping off his coffee. She paused, the pot hovering above his cup. "Way station on 19? She asked. "Mile 142? "That's the one," Caleb said. "Guy named Ballard working it. Old-fashioned setup, but it was open when I came through. A man in the next booth, another driver with a face lined like a well-used map, glanced over. "You sure about that?" he asked quietly. "Last I knew, that station's been shut since, 96? After Inspector Ballard keeled over on a double shift. The server nodded slowly. State built the new place off 47 and just let the old one sit. Kids go up there to spook themselves sometimes. No power, no lights, or so I've heard." Her tone suggested firmly that she did not, in fact, frequent abandoned way stations. Caleb's fork paused above his plate. His mind sketched the glow of the windows, the hum of the scale, the clean tick of the wall clock, the way the fog had held itself at the edge of the light, like a tide respecting a seawall. He didn't argue. There was nothing in him that wanted to wrestle the story into facts. Out on the road, some things were truer than explanations. On future nights, when fog laid itself down across Highway 19 and the signs for the old station loomed up out of the gray, he would watch for that particular quality of light ahead, that small island glow. Sometimes there was nothing but darkness and the silhouette of a boarded upscale house, as the others said. But now and then, on the heaviest nights, the sodium lamps would burn softly above the lane, and a warm amber would shine in the windows. And drivers who turned in often for reasons they couldn't quite articulate would roll back out with their legal loads unchanged, their paperwork untouched, and yet something in their chest a little lighter, something in their grip on the wheel a shade steadier, as the fog thinned and the road carried them on. Story number 5. By the time Jonas started the climb into Red Elk Pass, the world behind him had turned into a soft, indistinct glow in his mirrors. Ahead, there was nothing at all, just the fog, rolling down off the unseen peaks like slow, pale smoke. He'd been crossing these mountains for years, but never this late, and never with the air so strangely still. The usual winter winds that should have been worrying the sides of the trailer were absent. The night felt padded, as if someone had laid thick blankets over the whole range and muffled every sharp sound. His rig, a long-nosed blue Freightliner with just enough age to have a personality, hummed steadily beneath him. The dash glowed in familiar greens and ambers, each needle exactly where it should be. The heater sighed warm air against his shins. The faint smell of diesel and road dust threaded through the cab, cozy in its own way. Outside, the fog thickened as he climbed. It started as wisps hanging low in the ditches, then climbed the embankments, then finally stepped into the lanes themselves, erasing the line between road and cloud. His high beams only turned it into a bright, luminous wall. He dipped to low, flicked on his fog lights, and watched the world shrink to a tight-lit tunnel, barely 2 truck lengths ahead. The road here was a series of long switchbacks, gentle in daylight, deceptive at night. Reflective chevrons marked the curves, each arrow blooming suddenly out of the white and then sliding away into it. His engine note changed with the grade, from a working growl on the steeper pulls to a softer rumble on the slight plateaus. The radio faded out a mile or two back, the last station dissolving into a whisper of static. The CB had been dead silent for most of the night. Even the usual late-night chatter seemed to have gone around some other way. He checked the outside temperature on one of the digital gauges. 37 degrees. Not quite freezing, but close enough to make a man respectful. He remembered his first winter on these roads, how his trainer had tapped the window and said, "Up here, you don't trust a thing that looks dry and dark. You treat every shadow like it might try to slide you right off the mountain." He rolled his shoulders, one hand briefly leaving the wheel to rub at the tight muscles there. He was alone in the cab, and had been for a long stretch. No other headlights in his mirrors, no distant glow ahead. Just him, the truck, and the soft, relentless fog. Then, softly, the CB crackled. "Anybody else northbound in this soup?" The voice was male, somewhere between middle-aged and ageless, with that easy, rolling cadence Jonas associated with drivers who'd been on the road longer than he'd been alive. It sounded close and far at the same time, like something coming down a long hallway. Jonas reached for the mic, thumb brushing the worn groove on the push to talk. "Got a northbound here in Red Elk, climbing past mile 212. You out here too?" Static hissed for a heartbeat. Then, "Well, that makes 2 of us. You're about to tuck in with some company. Driver, keep your eyes peeled for taillights." Jonas frowned slightly, glancing at the empty white ahead. Taillights? There hadn't been a single vehicle up here since before the grade began. His speedometer sat at a steady 35, the gear low, the engine in its comfort zone. Then, out of the fog, 2 small red points appeared. They were faint at first, like distant stars seen through mist. They hovered at about eye level with his windshield, dead center in the lane ahead. No bright LED pattern, no distinctive shape, just 2 round, dull red glows, steady and unblinking. As he watched, they drew a little nearer, then settled, holding a careful distance in front of him. He eased back a touch, giving himself a longer following gap out of habit. The red twin dots mirrored his adjustment, drifting forward until they were again at that same comfortable remove. "Got you in sight," Jonas said into the mic. "Appreciate not being the only one up here." A chuckle came back through the speaker, low and warm. "We figured as much. Name's Leadfoot. Don't let it worry you. It's an old joke and I've slowed down since then. You just tucked on into the convoy, whether you meant to or not." "Convoy," Jonas echoed, eyes fixed on the taillights ahead. The word had an old taste to it, the kind from stories told by men who remembered the 70s and 80s with a mixture of pride and rue. "Been running this pass together a long time now," Leadfoot replied. "Fog sure likes you fresh ones, tries to wrap you up and keep you. Easier to slide on out when there's more than one set of wheels bite." As he listened, more lights ghosted into view on the edges of his vision. To the left lane, slightly ahead, another pair of red dots drifted into existence. In his driver's side mirror, so faint he could have blinked them away, he thought he caught the suggestion of a third set, staggered back and over, like trucks naturally spaced on a long pull. He hadn't seen them merge on. They simply were, their presence settling into the night as naturally as his own. In the glow from his headlights, Jonas could just make out the shape of the rig ahead. A boxy trailer, corners softer than the sharp-edged ones he was used to seeing, rear doors framed by thick metal hinges. The reflective tape pattern along the bottom wasn't the modern alternating red and white stripes, but long, uninterrupted bars that looked dark and matte until the light struck them just so. "How's that grade treating you?" another voice asked over the CB, this one higher, thin with a touch of reedy laughter in the background. "You're dragging paper, ain't ya? You'll float better'n most." Jonas glanced at the dash. They were talking like they could see inside his trailer. "Paper load, yeah," he admitted. "You boys keeping a log on me out there?" "Station up ahead keeps logs," Leadfoot said easily. "We just keep each other pointed the right way. You mind your speed on the next downgrade. She'll sneak up on you in this." A small pause. "Fog's only half of what's laid down tonight." Jonas checked the temperature again. Still 37. The pavement ahead looked uniformly dark, its subtleties erased by the fog. He could smell moisture through his vent, paired with that cold metal undertone that always came with higher altitudes. "Road report said just fog," he said. Road reports weren't driving when the wind turned and the melt refroze in the shadows. The other driver chimed in. "Trust the road under your tires, not the voice in your phone." Ahead, the taillights glowed a shade brighter, a small crimson flare that pulsed twice brake lights tapping. The effect ran up and down the unseen line. The faint dots to his left brightened briefly, and the shadow, shapes behind his own trailer, reflected that slow, concerted deceleration. It was the kind of communication convoy drivers made without ever touching a mic, a language of lights and timing. Jonas eased off the throttle, dropped another gear. The engine rumbled more deeply, a comforting vibration through the floor. The road curved left, then right, the chevrons on the posts whipping by in quick, muted flashes. As he reached the crest of the next rise, he felt it, the slightest, almost imperceptible slide under his wheels. A whisper of treachery from the pavement, as if the top layer had gone subtly slick. Not enough to throw him, not with his slower speed and careful gear, but enough to make his palms damp on the wheel. "Easy there," Leadfoot's voice said, as if he'd felt it too. "Black glass on that first bit of the downhill. Engine brake low. Let her walk, don't shove." Jonas swallowed, nodded to no one, and did exactly that. He felt the weight behind him press gently, the tractor settling into the harness of the grade. The fog seemed thicker somehow on the downgrade, curling over the hood, slipping against the windshield in slow, silky streams. The taillights ahead never wavered. They rode the hill like it was muscle memory, each slight change in their brightness a gentle cue. Behind him, in his mirror, the faint red dots of the truck further back dipped and rose in perfect accord, a silent reassurance that the whole chain was holding. "Appreciate the heads up," Jonas said, voice softer than before. "Didn't realize there was ice down." "There's always ice somewhere," the second voice said wryly. "Just a question of whether you meet it or pass it by." Something in their tone, neither preachy nor proud, just familiar settled the restless part of him that had been tightening as the fog deepened. It felt like falling in with an old, practiced crew, even though he'd never met these men before tonight. As they worked their way down the grade, the fog swirled in thick eddies, sometimes parting just enough for Jonas to glimpse the vague drop of the mountainside to his right, a softness where there should have been hard edge and granite. Once, for a heartbeat, he thought he saw old wooden guardrails down there instead of the modern steel short posts, blunt and square, dark with age. He blinked, and they were gone, replaced by the faint silver arc of the real ones. "What's your handle, new guy?" Leadfoot asked. "Can't keep calling you driver." "Jonas," he said, then added, because it felt right in this old-fashioned chorus, "Folks call me Blue." "Welcome to the Midnight Convoy, Blue," the other driver said, with a dry little flourish in his voice. "How long you boys been running together?" Jonas asked. Static whispered softly in the pause that followed, like someone drawing a breath. "Since that big blow in 78, Leadfoot said at last. Night, the whole pass went white and the world forgot where the edges were. Some of us made it through. Some didn't make it all the way to the bottom. Hard to tell sometimes who's which when the fog's this thick." The temperature gauge flickered once, briefly dipping, then settling back. A chill that had nothing to do with the air seeped along Jonas's arms under his jacket. He thought of the faint, older shapes of the rigs he could almost but not quite see in the murk. The way their taillights weren't as sharp as modern LEDs, but duller, more like glass bulbs glowing from within. Ahead, a green sign floated out of the fog, letters briefly legible in his beams. Red Elk Pass, Summit. Elev. 621. As he read it, the fog around him shifted. It didn't vanish, but thinned, rising like slow breath, leaving the lungs of the mountain. The white that had pressed against the glass softened to a high, pale ceiling. Far above, a few ragged stars shone through, smeared by the last wisps. The road leveled. The pressure of the grade eased from under his hands. "Here's where we leave you, Blue," Leadfoot said quietly. "You're clear on the far side. Just some patchy ground, hugger in the lowlands, nothing that wants to take you whole." The taillights ahead drifted a few truck lengths farther, then another. For a moment, Jonas could see more of the rig's outline. An old cab-over tractor, squared shoulders, trailer sides streaked with what might have been hand-painted lettering long since worn away. To his left, the faint shape of a tanker glimmered, its chrome dulled by age. In his mirror, a stubby-nosed rig with a rounded sleeper followed in the staggered slot, red dots glowing patiently. "Appreciate the escort," Jonas said, throat unexpectedly tight. "Didn't know I needed it till you showed up. That's when folks need it most," the second voice replied. "Keep the shiny side up, Blue. Watch Red Elk in the shoulder seasons," she remembers. Static rose again, gentle as a sigh. "Catch you on the other side," Leadfoot said, and there was something in his tone, some old, worn-out sadness braided with fondness that brushed softly against the edges of Jonas's thoughts. Then the CB went quiet. The taillights ahead dimmed, not like they were moving away, but like someone was slowly turning down a dimmer switch. For a few yards, Jonas could still sense the shape of the convoy, dark masses in the thinning fog, a shared momentum, the way the air parted around more than his own truck. And then, between one blink and the next, there was only the road. The sky opened further, stars sharpening into clearer points. The temperature inched up by a single degree. The pavement ahead looked drier, friendlier. His own headlights stretched farther, unimpeded. He checked his mirrors. Nothing but night, and the faint suggestion of his own trailer ghosting along behind him. At the base of the pass, a modest truck stop clung to the edge of the highway, its sign flickering half-heartedly. Jonas pulled in, more out of an instinctive need to put his boots on solid ground than for fuel. Inside, under buzzing fluorescent lights, he ordered coffee and a piece of pie from a tired waitress with a braid down her back. "You came over the pass just now?" she asked, pouring. "Yeah, thick fog on the climb." He hesitated. "Ran with a convoy for a bit. Fellas calling themselves the Midnight Convoy. Lead truck, guy named Leadfoot. Sound familiar?" Her hand paused briefly over the cup. A trucker at the far end of the counter, hunched over a bowl of soup, lifted his eyes. "Midnight Convoy, huh?" the older man said slowly. My old man used to talk about a group like that. Lost a bunch of rigs in '78 storm. Whiteout took 'em all over the summit. Some swore they heard 'em on the radio for weeks after, talking like they were still trying to get down. The waitress set the coffee in front of him. Fog gets strange up there, she said, as if that summed up something much larger. Sometimes folks roll in here with stories. Convoys. Voices on the CB that don't match the plates on the trucks they swear they saw. Far as I know, you were the only northbound past midnight on the scanner tonight. Jonas wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic mug, feeling the gentle heat soak into his fingers. Out the window, the pass loomed dark and quiet, a long shadow against the stars. The fog lay low along its shoulders now, more like scarves than shrouds. He did not argue with the man or the woman. He let their words settle alongside his own memory of dim red taillights, of old rigs riding the grade with unhurried expertise, of voices that had felt less like strangers and more like fellow travelers who had simply started their journey on a different night, in a different year. From then on, whenever fog began to gather around the lower slopes of Red Elk Pass and the highway signs warned of reduced visibility, Jonas would flick his CB on a little earlier, somewhere around mile 212, if the night was quiet enough and the air held that particular chill that wasn't quite weather. A familiar steady voice might roll in through the static, offering a word of caution, a mile marker, a reminder to take a grade slow. And drivers who tucked in behind faint, old-fashioned taillights on certain nights would find themselves eased over the mountain in the company of rigs that had known those curves long before digital gauges and modern slogans, ghosts of a convoy still doing what they had always done, keeping each other between the lines until the fog thinned and the road and the future widened out before them once more. Story number 6. On County Route 11, the night lay low and heavy over the fields, and the fog rose from the irrigation ditches like something the earth was exhaling. Darla eased her rig along the 2-lane blacktop. High beams washed down to low, fog lights throwing 2 short, hazy cones that were quickly swallowed. The world beyond them was a soft, formless gray. Her dashboard glowed a steady amber, gauges calm, the digital clock sliding toward 1:43 a.m. Somewhere behind her, the reefer unit ticked on and off, keeping a trailer full of produce at a steady chill. She was used to city runs, tangled freeways, sodium glare, the comfortingly anonymous crowds of headlights. Out here, in the flat heart of the farm belt, the emptiness felt like a presence. Fields stretched out on either side, invisible but implied, stitched with irrigation canals and lined with bare orchard rows. When she cracked her window, the air that seeped in was cold, saturated with the smells of damp soil, distant manure, the faint sweetness of old hay. The fog had started as a low sheen above the drainage ditches, then thickened, creeping up the embankments until it laid itself across the road in patches. Tule fog. The locals called it ground-hugging, treacherous, notorious for swallowing the world in a matter of minutes. She'd seen the photos in the break room of pile-ups from decades ago. Nothing graphic, just lines of hazard lights fading into milky nowhere. Dispatch had been casual on the phone when she'd left the depot. "Watch the 11 between Prairie Crossing and mile 60, they'd said. "Fog likes to park there at night. Take it slow and you'll be fine." The GPS on the dash showed a straight, ruler-o-sharp line of road cutting between neat rectangles of agricultural land. No curves to speak of, no towns, just a few thin side roads. Nothing that should have been difficult. The radio had long since drifted to static. She cycled through stations finding only faint ghost songs and distant lady-night hosts discussing weather systems 3 states away. After a while, she let it sit on the least noisy frequency, more for the company of the low hiss than any expectation of music. The fog thickened. It did so, not dramatically, but with a smooth persistence, as if someone were slowly turning a dial. The visible distance shrank to 50 feet, then 30. The white center line and the crumbling edge stripe became her anchors. Trees, if there were any, were lost beyond the soft wall pressing at the limits of her headlights. She reduced her speed, hazard lights winking gently into the gray. The steering wheel vibrated faintly under her palms, the road surface subtly different from the freeway's smoothness, older asphalt, patched here and there. The truck's engine hummed a low, contented note. On her right, a green sign rose out of the fog with almost no warning. Prairie School RD. Next right, the arrow pointed into the mist. She caught only a flash of the side road, a darker slash angling away from the main route before it vanished behind the trailer. The name brushed against the edges of some half-remembered childhood image. A low building, a bell tower, kids in puffy jackets waiting for a bus in morning fog. As if on cue, a sound reached her very faintly through the insulated cab, the muted chorus of frogs from the ditches. A damp, irregular music, punctuated by the occasional drip of water from unseen culverts. The cab's heater purred. Her eyes felt dry and sandy. She blinked deliberately, 1, 2, 3 times, focusing on the double line ahead. The radio crackled. It wasn't the bright, jagged burst of a channel changing, but a soft clearing of static, like someone gently adjusting a dial. Then, out of the noise, a voice emerged, thin, tinny, edged with the faint hiss of an AM station pulled in from a long way off. And in local news, several districts are reporting closures this morning due to dense tulle fog. Let's run through those school closings. Darla's breath hitched, just a fraction. The cadence was familiar in a way that tugged at some deep, childlike corner of her memory. An announcer's measured tone, the patient reading of a list students always listen to with held breath. She glanced at the radio. The digital display simply read 5:30 a.m. She didn't remember tuning to that. She hadn't heard an ad or a song, just static. Then this, the voice continued, unhurried. Merritt Union, closed. Aliso Ridge, closed. Prairie School District, closed. Pena Flats, 2-hour delay. Prairie. The word landed like a soft weight. She looked out at the fog again, feeling it press gently against the cab, a pale, moving wall. The announcer sounded like he'd stepped out of another decade. There was a certain roundedness to the way he clipped consonants, a slight echo, as if he were speaking from a small studio lined with cork tiles. In the background, she thought she could hear the faint rustle of paper. Due to localized dense fog conditions, he went on, buses will not be running on County Route 11 between mile 52 and mile 60. Parents are advised to keep children at home and off the roadway. The hair along her forearms lifted under her flannel. She reached for the radio knob. The plastic felt solid, a little warm from the dash glow. She turned it slightly to the right. Static rose, then fell, but the voice persisted, threading through the noise with unwavering clarity. Visibility reported as near zero in low-whiling areas. Drivers are urged to reduce speed, use low Y-beam headlights, and watch for unexpected intersections. She checked the GPS. The little truck icon crawled along its straight path. Mile 52 had passed a minute or two ago. She remembered the small, reflective marker appearing and dissolving in her lights. Ahead, something shifted in the gray. A darker, elongated shape materialized near the right shoulder, parallel to the road. Her heart did a quiet, miserable little jump, too tall and squared to be a deer, too low to be a sign. She lifted off the throttle, let the truck slow, hazard lights blinking an amber metronome. The shape clarified as she crept nearer. A vehicle, parked just off the asphalt. Long, rectangular side, height suggesting something larger than a car. For an instant, as her lights brushed it, it looked exactly like a school bus, yellow dulled by the fog, windows a series of soft, black rectangles. It sat at an angle like something that had rolled to a careful stop. There were no running lights, no reflectors catching her beams, no license plate glint, just the matte suggestion of a hulking outline, familiar and utterly out of place at nearly 2 in the morning. She blinked, and her truck rolled forward. In the next heartbeat, there was nothing there at all. Just the murky suggestion of a drainage ditch and the flat land beyond. Her fingers tightened on the wheel. She glanced in the right mirror. Only the long, pale flank of her own trailer floated there, the fog wrapping around it. Unnecessary bus routes are canceled, the announcer's voice said mildly. as if in response to her thoughts. Motorists are reminded that children may be difficult to see in fog conditions. Please use extra caution around all school zones and rural stops. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. It's the middle of the night, she muttered out loud, thinking it would anchor her in the ordinary. There's no kids, no buses. The road rolled on, unbending. The white stripes flickered under her truck like a slow pulse. Outside, the fog stroked the trailer in long, invisible hands. A shape appeared ahead on the right. Small, vertical, a sign, Redwood Canal, bridge ahead. 45 feet. She eased down, footlight on the brake. Her speedometer settled just under 40. The engine's hum dropped in pitch. Somewhere far below the roadway, beyond what her lights could touch, water moved in a deep, unseen channel. Its faint, steady murmur, only a rumor at this distance. The announcer's voice went on with its list. Additional closures include Prairie Creek Elementary and Riverside School. All extracurricular activities are also canceled. Drivers on County Route 11 are advised. The voice paused, the static around it thickening for a moment, like breath drawn in. Drivers currently traveling northbound on Route 11 are advised to slow to 30 miles per hour. A sharp offset intersection is reported near mile 56. Visibility is significantly reduced. The phrasing snagged at her. Currently traveling northbound. That was her. She flicked her gaze between the odometer and the roadside, hunting for the next mile marker. The fog pushed back, concealing everything until the last second. Mile 55 rose out of the gray and slipped past. Ahead, the road appeared to intend to continue straight forever. The double yellow line unwavering, the edge stripe consistent. She stared, looking for any break, any angle. Nothing. Approaching mile 56, the radio voice said gently, almost conversational. Reduce speed now. She did, without thinking, foot easing off, then depressing the brake gradually, feeling the weight behind her respond. The truck slowed. The engine brake grumbled softly, low, and controlled. The fog thickened further. A soft, suffocating bloom, turning her low beams into twin smears of light with no depth. The world beyond the hood vanished. All that remained was the sputtering whiteness and the immediate patch of pavement. And then, with almost no warning, the road did something her eyes had not promised. It jogged left. Not a sweeping curve, not a gentle bend announced by a forest of warning signs. A hard 90-degree offset at a lonely crossroad, the main route shifting a full lane's width before continuing straight on again. The kind of quirk that farm roads acquired over a century of property lines and canal work. A big red stop sign loomed up on her right, close and sudden, its surface beaded with moisture. A faded white line ghosted across the lane. She realized with a cold, distant clarity that, at highway speed, she would have rolled right past it into the invisible field beyond, tires leaving the blacktop in a way you never wanted. She braked harder, but still gentle, the way she'd been taught. The truck bowed its head slightly, obedient. She came down to nearly a crawl, eased the steering wheel left, felt the tractor nose follow the jog, trailer swinging behind in smooth, controlled arc. To her right, in the brief space the fog allowed, she glimpsed the rest of the crossroad, a narrower gravel lane vanishing into the night, flanked by the dark suggestion of trees. For a heartbeat, between two breaths, she thought she saw it again, parked at the edge of that side road, half turned toward the main highway. The bus. This time, the image was softer, as if seen through old glass. The rounded front, the tall central door, the faint glow of yellow paint dulled by age. A single light burned above the windshield, casting a pale halo. Through the side windows, the silhouettes of seats empty, neat lined up in even rows. She blinked, and it was gone. The crossroad was once again nothing but gravel and fence, and the yawning whiteness beyond. Intersection passed. The announcer's voice said quietly, satisfaction threaded through the words. Thank you for driving with caution. Remember, in fog, familiar roads can hide unfamiliar dangers. Her hands had gone damp, She wiped one on her jeans, exhaled slowly, and let the truck rebuild a little speed, just enough to feel like movement rather than inching. The bridge over Redwood Canal came and went under her wheels with a subtle change in sound, a hollow note under the tires, the suggestion of open space beneath. The fog seemed to hang heavier over the water, then loosen as she rolled off the span. Prairie School District remains closed, the voice said, softer now, fading. Please keep students safe at home, off the roads, and out of the fog. This has been your early morning advisory. The static swelled, swallowing the words. For a heartbeat, she heard something else under it. The faint rattle of children's laughter, distant and airy, as if carried across a playground from far away and long ago. Then even that was gone, replaced by the bland hiss of an off-station frequency. Darla reached for the tuner and found nothing. A country song from another city, a talk show, an infomercial. When she turned back to 5:30 a.m., there was only silence. Not even static, just an empty, dead hush, like a station that had gone off the air for the night. The fog began to thin around mile 60, exactly as dispatch's notes had promised. It peeled away in low, unwilling tatters, revealing the flat geometry of the fields, the stark lines of orchard rows, the pale gleam of standing water in the canals. The night sky reasserted itself above her, a charcoal dome spattered with a few dim stars. At the next junction with a larger highway, a lone all-eyed night cafe glowed by the roadside, its sign buzzing faintly. On impulse, she pulled in, the lot gravel crunching under her tires. Inside, coffee steamed in thick mugs, the air smelled like bacon grease and pancake syrup, and a couple of other drivers hunched over plates, the blue spill of a muted television flickering in the corner. She chose a stool at the counter and ordered eggs and toast she hadn't realized she wanted. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, topped off her coffee without asking. "Fog bad out there?" she asked, making small talk. "Thick on the 11 near Prairie School Road," Darla said. Radio started playing this old-sounding school closing report. Warned me about a weird little jog at mile 56. If it hadn't, she trailed off, not wanting to finish the thought out loud. The woman's expression shifted, something like recognition passing through. "School closings?" she repeated. "On the AM band?" "Yeah, 530. Darla hesitated. Announcer sounded like something from years back. Talked about Prairie District being closed. Told northbound drivers to slow. Gave the exact mile marker. I figured it was some local station. The waitress glanced at the muted TV, as if reassured by its modern scroll of weather graphics, then back at Darla. "There hasn't been a station at 530 since before I was born," she said quietly. "Used to be one out of town that did the morning school reports. Shut down after a fire in the mid-'80s. She wiped her hands on a towel, thinking. "My granddad used to talk about the fog channel. Said on bad nights out by Prairie, he'd hear that old announcer come through, warning about the canal and that cursed intersection." One of the other drivers at the counter looked over. "Bus accident," he said simply. "Long time ago. Nobody around here likes to go into details about it. Fog, bad timing, bad layout on the road. They changed the intersection after, put in that weird jog, but..." He shrugged. "They say on some nights, whoever's left of that old station runs their reports until every last bus route on that stretch is safe." The cafe's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The clock on the wall ticked toward 3 a.m. Outside, the thinning fog drifted past the window in slow, reluctant curls, like breath leaving a sleeping giant. Darla wrapped her hands around the warm mug and let the chill along her spine settle into something else. Neither fear nor disbelief, but a quiet, uneasy gratitude. The memory of that soft, tinny voice, naming her route, her mile, her exact danger, felt as solid as the ceramic beneath her palms. She did not mention the bus she thought she'd seen at the roadside, or the way the laughter had woven through the static for just a second. Those felt like fragile things, meant to be held gently, not examined under bright lights and someone else's skepticism. From then on, whenever her dispatch sheet routed her along County Route 11 on a fog-thick night, she tuned her radio to 530 as she neared Prairie School Road. Most nights, there was nothing but the quiet hiss of empty air. But sometimes, as the white world closed in and the frogs sang in the ditches, a thin, kindly voice would thread through the static, reading off a list of districts and delays, reminding unseen parents to keep children home, and advising anonymous northbound drivers on Route 11 to slow down for a curve the map still insisted was straight. And on those nights, the bus at the edge of the fog would remain where it belonged in the soft, blurred border between memory and mist, while the living trucks kept their tires on the blacktop and rolled safely past, guided by a broadcast that refused to go entirely off the air. Story number 7. Out on the coastal highway, where the road lifted itself up and over the dark water in a slender concrete arch, the fog came in from the sea like a living thing. Malik had watched it creep across the bay as he approached. A low, rolling bank that glowed faintly under the distant harbor lights. By the time he reached the base of the old causeway, it had risen to meet him, smoothing the boundary between sky and water until everything beyond the guardrails was simply gray. His rig's cab was a small universe of familiar details. The soft hum of the engine, the gentle vibration through the floor, the green numerals on the dash reading 2:11 a.m. The smell inside was a blend of coffee, worn fabric, and the faint metallic tang of salt that found its way in along this route, even with the windows sealed. The radio was turned low, some outwith station murmuring music that dissolved into static as the miles slid by. The causeway loomed ahead, a long, low spine of concrete marching out across the water. Overhead, an old metal sign curved on its arch. Bayshore Causeway. Next 12 miles. No shoulder. He'd taken it once before. In clear weather, flat, straight, the kind of drive that blurred into monotony. Tonight, with the marine layer thickening, it felt like steering out onto a bridge that vanished into nothing. He eased onto the ramp, tires thumping softly over the expansion joints. The fog swallowed him almost immediately. One moment there had been dim shapes of shoreline businesses, gas stations, a blinking red radio tower. The next, there was only the wet gleam of the lane ahead and a wall of white on either side. His high beams turned the mist into a molten silver sheet, so he left them low, fog lights carving short tunnels that closed behind him as quickly as they opened. The soundscape changed. City noise fell away, muffled and distant. An occasional foghorn boomed from somewhere out in the bay, its low note reverberating through the steel of the bridge. The slap of waves against pilings was more felt than heard, a subtle tremor under the roar of tires. The cab's heater blew steadily, drying the damp that threatened to creep into his bones. He checked the speedometer. 45, a safe compromise between progress and caution. There was no visible traffic ahead. In his mirrors, there was only white, brightened slightly by the red glimmer of his own taillights reflecting off the fog. The GPS showed a thin line of road suspended above a faint blue smear labeled Bayshore Inlet, the little truck icon inching forward. A variable message sign appeared out of the fog, its orange letters swimming into focus at the last moment. Fog ahead. Use low beams. Maintain safe speed. He snorted softly. No kidding, he said to the glass. But the sign's light felt oddly reassuring, a human touch in the featureless night. He rolled on. Concrete joints ticked under his tires in a rhythmic pattern. The world narrowed to the patch of pavement in front of his bumper and the ghostly damp glow of the guardrail. The fog pressed close, a soft, persistent presence against every window. Somewhere around mile 5, the radio finally gave up its last distant song and drifted to white noise. Malik let it be, the hiss, a kind of background breathing that made the silence less absolute. He thought about calling his wife, then pictured the time on her nightstand clock, and decided against it. Better to let home stay asleep and undisturbed, a warm idea rather than a voice in this chilled, enclosed world. Another sign rose up out of the mist, so suddenly it made him startle. Fog control. Reduce speed zone ahead. Prepare to stop. He frowned. Fog control? He hadn't seen that before. Not on this bridge. The digital display below the message was blank, as if waiting. He lifted his foot, let the truck begin to slow. The engine note dropped, the vibration changing pitch. Water beaded more thickly on the windshield. The wipers squeaked back and forth in a steady, measured arc. Then he saw the lights. At first they were only a diffuse glow in the distance, pale yellow smudges hovering in the fog. As he drew nearer, they resolved into something more precise, a cluster of overhead lamps, illuminating a spread of roadway that broke the straight line of the causeway. He could just make out vertical shapes beneath them, booths, canopies, signs. A toll plaza? He murmured, incredulous. The Bayshore Causeway had gone toll-free years ago. Dispatch had mentioned it casually. Used to be a toll, but they took it down. Just drive straight through. Yet here it was, emerging from the milky gray, an island of structure in the middle of the void. He slowed further, down to 20, then 15. The truck's reflectors picked up the outlines of striped barriers, concrete dividers, black-ounded white chevrons pointing around faded booths. The structure didn't look new. The paint on the canopies was dulled, the edges softened by salt air, but the lamps above glowed steadily, casting down warm, almost domestic light. Over the center lane, an old rectangular sign was mounted, its bulbs lighting up neat block letters. Trucks. Fog control. Stop. The booth aligned with that lane had its window lit from within. Malik could see a figure inside, seated, shoulders hunched slightly, in what looked like a heavy slicker. The shape moved, turned toward him. Instinct and training kicked in before logic could. He guided the rig into the marked truck lane, rolled up to the white stop line, and let the air brake sigh as he came to a halt. For a moment, the fog outside the halo of lights was absolute. The bridge, the water, the rest of the causeway all ceased to exist. There was just this little square of illuminated concrete, his truck, and the small glass booth with its yellowed glow. He watched as the figure inside reached for a switch or microphone. A second later, a speaker mounted on a post crackled. "Evening, driver," a man's voice said. It was low, with a worn, sea-softened edge to it. "Fog's a beast tonight." Malik leaned slightly toward his open side window, though the cab was sealed. The voice felt strangely close, as if the speaker were right beside him instead of filtered through old wiring. "Sure is," he replied automatically. "Didn't know the toll plaza was still active out here." A small chuckle rode the reply. "Oh, we're not taking tolls anymore. Just watching the fog. Need you to hold up a minute. There's trouble ahead on the span." Malik's skin prickled along his arms. He glanced at his dash clock. 2:19. He looked at the GPS. It still showed the little truck inching over blue, no indication of any structures. "Trouble?" he asked. "Haven't heard anything on the scanner. Scanner's as blind as the rest of them in this soup," the man said mildly. "You've got a jackknife tanker up around marker 8. Couple of cars behind it. No injuries so far, but lanes are blocked. You barrel into that, you're not stopping in time, not with this dew point and that weight." Static whispered for a heartbeat under the words, like the sound of wind stroking across a microphone. Malik's mouth went dry. He glanced ahead. The fog beyond the plaza was so dense it looked like poured milk. There was no suggestion of taillights, no flicker of hazard flashers. "How do you know?" he asked before he could stop himself. A small movement inside the booth, shoulders rising and falling. "Bridge talks to us," the man said simply. "We see the glow when the lights are still hid. You listen close enough, you can hear trouble in the way the tires sing." It was an odd answer, but there was no impatience in it. Only a sort of tired familiarity, like someone explaining a long-acquired habit. "Here's what you're gonna do, Malik." Hearing his name from the darkness jolted him more than the mention of Rex. He hadn't given it. The ID on his vest was turned away. His truck's unit number was visible, his name was not. "You're gonna roll on when I give the word," the man continued, unfazed. "Ease her up to 30, no more. Stay left of center as you pass marker 8. That's where the tanker'll be, straddling both lanes. Don't ride your brakes hard. You'll lose your grip. Let your engine hold you, and keep your eyes on the rail, not the shapes in the fog. Understand?" Malik's heart had picked up a little, but his hands felt steady on the wheel. The instructions were specific, practical, nothing fanciful about them. This was exactly the kind of detail a competent bridge control operator would give if such a person existed here, now. "Yes, sir," he said. Left of center at 8, 30 max, no hard brakes. That's it, the man said. We'll walk you past. Hold one more minute. In the booth, the figure turned away, as if checking something on a panel. Beyond the reach of the plaza's light, the fog pressed close, a soft, pulsing wall. The old bulbs overhead hummed quietly. Somewhere, far below, a boat horn sounded, dull and distant. Malik found himself watching the little pool of condensation growing at the base of the speaker post, the way the droplets formed and slid down the metal. Time loosened its grip. The seconds felt stretched, each one an isolated bead on a string. The radio on his dash, which had been silent, crackled abruptly. Every 78 eastbound major fog-related incident reported on the Bayshore Causeway near Mile 8, a generic traffic anchor's voice said, tight with subdued urgency. Drivers are advised to avoid the span if possible and expect closures. Static swallowed the rest. Malik sat up straighter. In the booth, the man reached for the microphone again. That's your cue, he said. Ease her forward. I've got you. The stoplight over the lane, which Malik hadn't even consciously noted as red, flipped to green with a faint mechanical clunk. He released the brake, nudged the accelerator. The rig rolled forward, crossing under the low canopy and out into the fog. The world shrank instantly. The comforting glow of the plaza dropped away behind him, swallowed by white. His headlights once more illuminated only a small patch of damp concrete. The guardrail appeared and disappeared in ragged, wet gleams. Keep her steady, the man's voice said from the speaker by his window, though he'd rolled forward well beyond it. The sound seemed to ride alongside him now, not quite from the radio, not quite from outside. You're doing fine. Watch for the markers. A small green sign loomed on the right. 7 Mile. It sailed past. The air felt different here, thicker, heavy, with a chilled metallic tang like breathing inside a cloud. He could taste salt more strongly on his tongue. Somewhere ahead, faint and far away, he thought he heard the echo of raised voices, the sharp, "Loosen your mind." At least not any more than usual on a night like this. The road unspooled under them, slow and unchanging. The mile markers rose and fell on the right, briefly visible then gone. Small green reassurances in the monochrome world. Mile uçuziki, mile uçuzuç. You remember the last time it was this thick up here? The younger voice asked. You were hauling empty racks back from the plant. Thought you'd make up time across the plain. Lyle's hands tightened on the wheel. Memory surged up, vivid as if someone had switched on a projector behind his eyes. Headlights punching into white, overconfidence riding shotgun. A faint, ghostly set of taillights ahead that he'd almost ridden right up onto before a curve. I remember, he said, jaw working. Taught me some humility. You'd have met that steel ranch fence if you hadn't listened to the gut that time, the other said. You slowed down even though the clock was barking at you. You listened to that little whisper that said, ease off, or you're not going home. Their trucks rolled on side by side, engines a low duet under the fog. The younger rig's paint was clearer now and Lyle's peripheral vision faded, but still that same deep red the company had abandoned years back. On the door, he could just make out a ghost of a logo that matched an old patch, still sewn on one of his jackets in the closet at home. Why you here? Lyle asked quietly. The question slipped out as easily as breath. If you're who I think you're trying to be. Static softened, then faded, like someone leaning closer to the mic on the other side. Road's got a way of bending back on itself in spots, the younger him said. Thin places. You know that. You felt the edges a dozen times. Places where the nights you almost broke and the nights you made it through sit real close together. A small wry note came into his tone. Low Prairie Cut's one of them. The name sounded like something off a hand-drawn map. Driver's slang that had half-often fallen out of use. You get to this point, the voice went on. Last long haul, fog thick as it ever gets, and you're loaded up with 30 years worth of almosts and what-ifs. Sometimes the road just holds the mirror up higher for a while. Lets you take one more good look. Lyle said nothing. The fog pressed around the cab, thick and luminous, making the world feel both smaller and endless. Inside his chest, a knot he hadn't wanted to call by name, fear of ending, of stopping forever, of what waited when there were no more miles to count, pulled tight. then looser, then tight again. "You've been thinking about that turnoff at mile 178, the younger voice said casually, as if mentioning weather. "The one that goes east, toward the little town with your boy in it." The thought had been a quiet ache at the back of his brain for days, a half-formed plan, always postponed, to swing by and see the son he hadn't talked to properly since the divorce had scattered their lives like so much gravel. A number in his contacts he tapped past every week, never pressing call. "You knew you'd have time between loads," the voice continued. "Thought about it as you were rolling past. Thought, next time, when I'm not tired, when it's not dark, when I don't smell like diesel and truck stop coffee." A soft chuckle. "Trouble is, you've been saying next time for 10 years, Sky." The old nickname, stripped down, hit harder than the mild reproach. Lyle's throat tightened. He watched the center line flash under the hood, the only solid thing in a world made of cloud. "You come all this way to scold me?" he asked, trying to inject a bit of humor into it, but it came out rough. "No," the other said gently. "Just to remind you, you're not the only one who ever sat out here in the dark, wondering if he'd already missed his turn. You remember the night you almost quit? Parked the truck behind that grocery store in Amarillo, sat on the step with a cup of coffee and a resignation letter half written in your head." Lyle's mind found that night with unnerving precision. The orange sodium lights, the smell of wet cardboard from the dumpster, the way his hands had shaken not from cold but from sheer worn-outness. "You didn't quit," the younger voice said. "You took a breath, decided to do one more run, and then another. You gave yourself that choice, not because anyone told you what to do, but because some stubborn piece of you wasn't done." Beside him, in the other lane, the ghost rig's clearance lights glowed softly, a row of red embers in the mist. The silhouette in the driver's seat sat easy, one arm out, exactly the way he used to ride the empty miles. "You've been letting the fog tell you you're finished," the other said. "Tell you there's nothing but white out the windshield. But you know better. A beat. Maybe you're done with driving for a paycheck. But you're not done with roads. Not done with finding your way to places you've been putting off." The CB's small speaker made the words feel close, intimate. The truck's engine was a steady hum beneath them, a kind of bass note to the conversation. Mile 306 slid past. Mile 307. The fog began to change again, so subtly he might not have noticed if he hadn't been paying attention. It lifted just a little from the pavement, hovering more than clinging. He could see the faint suggestion of fence posts now, like thin, dark strokes in watercolor. The air felt less thick in his lungs. "You're coming up on the end of the cut," the younger voice said. "Ground cloud don't like the higher ground. It'll peel off soon. When it does, you're going to have a stretch of clear, starry sky and a whole lot of flat land. Good place to think. Good place to make a call." Lyle swallowed hard. "What if he doesn't pick up?" he asked, the question floating out into the cab before he could stuff it back down. "Then you leave a message," the other said. "You say, 'It's your old man, I'm heading your way if you'll have me.' You hang up, and you keep driving east at mile 178 instead of blowing by like you always do. Road does what it does. People do what they do. What matters is you don't let fear of not being welcome keep you out in the fog forever." The simplicity of it, stripped of all the excuses he'd built up into a wall over the years, made his chest feel both lighter and more fragile. The white beyond the windshield brightened, tones of silver and faint blue creeping into the monochrome. He risked a glance left again. The other rig was clearer now, as if the fog itself had thinned between them. He could see the old-style exhaust stacks, the shape of the mirrors, the curve of the visor. Through the side window, the driver's profile was just visible, a strong jaw, dark stubble, eyes focused ahead, his own face from 25 years ago, if someone had held up a photo. For a heartbeat, their gazes met through the soft blur of glass and mist. The younger him lifted 2 fingers from the wheel in a small salute, the gesture he'd always given other drivers back then when passing at night. "You'll be all right," the voice said, softer now, as if moving away down a hall. "You made it this far. Don't stop before the good part." Then the CB hissed loud, a burst of static that made him wince. When it cleared, there was only the usual low, empty crackle. He looked left again. The passing lane was empty. No red clearance lights, no old red trailer, just fog, thinning now by degrees, revealing the faint glimmer of wet pavement, and, beyond it, the flat, open fields edging back into sight. Ahead, the sky had a texture again, a faint sprinkle of stars peeking through rents in the ground cloud. The white around him lost its density, becoming more like low mist than full enclosure. His headlights reached farther. The world felt less like a closed room, and more like a space with edges again. Mile 310 rose out of the fog, reflective 310 catching his beams. He watched it slip past, aware that this too was a kind of marker inside him. By the time he reached the junction where 73 met the eastbound state highway toward his son's town, the sky above was a deep, clean black, stitched with stars. The land on either side of the road lay in quiet, silvered fields. The green sign for the turnoff loomed up on the right. Jest 24, Grafton 42, Merów 68, Marrow. The name of a town he'd said out loud, mostly in the context of someday. His hands moved almost without his permission. Signal on. Speed easing. The truck's weight shifted as he took the off-ramp, tires humming a different tune on the newer asphalt. In the quiet that followed, as night fields replaced fog fields and the sky opened fully above him, he took his phone from the dash mount and glanced down at the contacts list during a straight stretch. The name stared back. Ben. He tapped it with a thumb that didn't quite feel like his own. The ring sounded impossibly loud in the cozy cab. Once, twice, 3 times. He almost thumbed and, on the 4th, the line clicked. A voice, groggy and wary, answered. "Hello? Hey, kiddo," Lyle said, his own voice sounding rough and older to his ears. "But steady. It's your old man. I'm out on 24 running light. Think I might be coming your way if that's all right." There was a pause. In it, the hum of the engine and the soft whistle of air around the cab became a kind of quiet music. Finally, his son exhaled. "You're driving at 2 in the morning?" he said. Disbelief and concern tangled in the words. "Of course it's all right. Just be careful. It's foggy out there sometimes." Lyle smiled, a small private curve of his mouth. "I've got help," he said. "Road's clearer than it's been in a long time." They talked, halting at first, then with slowly warming ease, as the miles ticked by under a sky that seemed to stretch on forever. No grand reconciliations, no dramatic declarations, just the simple, ordinary cadence of 2 people letting each other in, a little at a time. Later, at truck stops and diners and in cabs idling under starlight, drivers would swap stories about Low Prairie Cut, about the way the fog there sometimes seemed thicker than it had any right to be. Some swore they'd seen another truck pace them in the murk, paint just a shade too old, logo a style that hadn't been used in years. A few admitted, in the safety of shared coffee and fatigue, that they'd heard their own younger voices on the CB, offering advice they didn't know they'd needed. They called it a mirror mile, a place where the road's long memory folded back on itself just enough to let a driver see who he'd been and who he might still be, if he chose. Most nights, it was just a stretch of foggy-prone pavement on Highway 73, nothing more. But on certain small-hours runs, when the ground cloud rose thick and the world shrank to the glow inside a cab, Low Prairie Cut became something stranger, quieter, and oddly kind of place where, for a few miles, the past and the present rode side by side until the fog lifted and the road and the life ahead opened out once more. Losing your mind, at least not any more than usual on a night like this. The road unspooled under them, slow and unchanging. The mile markers rose and fell on the right, briefly visible, then gone. Small green reassurances in the monochrome world. Mile 300, Mile 300. "You remember the last time it was this thick up here?" the younger voice asked. "You were hauling empty racks back from the plant. Thought you'd make up time across the plain." Lyle's hands tightened on the wheel. Memory surged up, vivid as if someone had switched on a projector behind his eyes. Headlights punching into white, overconfidence riding shotgun. A faint, ghostly set of taillights ahead that he'd almost ridden right up onto before a curve. I remember, he said, jaw working. Taught me some humility. You'd have met that steel ranch fence if you hadn't listened to the gut that time, the other said. You slowed down even though the clock was barking at you. You listened to that little whisper that said, ease off, or you're not going home. Their trucks rolled on side by side, engines a low duet under the fog. The younger rig's paint was clearer now in Lyle's peripheral vision, faded but still that same deep red the company had abandoned years back. On the door he could just make out a ghost of a logo that matched an old patch still sewn on one of his jackets in the closet at home. Why you here? Lyle asked quietly. The question slipped out as easily as breath. If you're who I think you're trying to be. Static softened, then faded, like someone leaning closer to the mic on the other side. Roads got a way of bending back on itself in spots, the younger him said. Thin places, you know that. You felt the edges a dozen times. Places where the nights you almost broke and the nights you made it through sit real close together. A small, wry note came into his tone. Low Prairie Cut's one of them. The name sounded like something off a handy-drawn map. Driver's slang that had half fallen out of use. You get to this point, the voice went on. Last long haul, fog thick as it ever gets, and you're loaded up with 30 years worth of almosts and what-ifs. Sometimes the road just holds the mirror up higher for a while. Lets you take one more good look. Lyle said nothing. The fog pressed around the cab, thick and luminous, making the world feel both smaller and endless. Inside his chest, a knot he hadn't wanted to call by name, fear of ending, of stopping forever, of what waited when there were no more miles to count, pulled tight, then looser, then tight again. You've been thinking about that turnoff at mile 178, the younger voice said casually as if mentioning weather. The one that goes east, toward the little town with your boy in it. The thought had been a quiet ache at the back of his brain for days. A half-formed plan always postponed, to swing by and see the son he hadn't talked to properly since the divorce had scattered their lives like so much gravel. A number in his contacts, he tapped past every week, never pressing call. You knew you'd have time between loads, the voice continued. Thought about it as you were rolling past. Thought next time, when I'm not tired, when it's not dark, when I don't smell like diesel and truck stop coffee. A soft chuckle. Trouble is, you've been saying next time for 10 years, Sky. The old nickname, stripped down, hit harder than the mild reproach. Lyle's throat tightened. He watched the center line flash under the hood, the only solid thing in a world made of cloud. You come all this way to scold me? He asked, trying to inject a bit of humor into it, but it came out rough. No, the other said gently, just to remind you you're not the only one who ever sat out here in the dark, wondering if he'd already missed his turn. You remember the night you almost quit? Parked the truck behind that grocery store in Amarillo. Sat on the step with a cup of coffee and a resignation letter half written in your head. Lyle's mind found that night with unnerving precision. The orange sodium lights, the smell of wet cardboard from the dumpster, the way his hands had shaken not from cold, but from sheer worn-outness. You didn't quit, the younger voice said. You took a breath, decided to do one more run, and then another. You gave yourself that choice, not because anyone told you what to do, but because some stubborn piece of you wasn't done. Beside him, in the other lane, the ghost rig's clearance lights glowed softly, a row of red embers in the mist. The silhouette in the driver's seat sat easy, one arm out, exactly the way he used to ride the empty miles. You've been letting the fog tell you you're finished, the other said. Tell you there's nothing but white out the windshield, but you know better. A beat. Maybe you're done with driving for a paycheck. But you're not done with roads. Not done with finding your way to places you've been putting off. The CB's small speaker made the words feel close, intimate. The truck's engine was a steady hum beneath them, a kind of bass note to the conversation. Mile 306 slid past. 1307. The fog began to change again so subtly he might not have noticed if he hadn't been paying attention. It lifted just a little from the pavement, hovering more than clinging. He could see the faint suggestion of fence posts now, like thin, dark strokes in watercolor. The air felt less thick in his lungs. You're coming up on the end of the cut, the younger voice said. Ground cloud don't like the higher ground. It'll peel off soon. When it does, You're going to have a stretch of clear, starry sky and a whole lot of flat land. Good place to think. Good place to make a call. Lyle swallowed hard. What if he doesn't pick up? He asked, the question floating out into the cab before he could stuff it back down. Then you leave a message, the other said. You say, "It's your old man. I'm heading your way if you'll have me." You hang up, and you keep driving east at mile 178, instead of blowing by like you always do. Road does what it does. People do what they do. What matters is you don't let fear of not being welcome keep you out in the fog forever. The simplicity of it, stripped of all the excuses he'd built up into a wall over the years, made his chest feel both lighter and more fragile. The white beyond the windshield brightened, tones of silver and faint blue creeping into the monochrome. He risked a glance left again. The other rig was clearer now, as if the fog itself had thinned between them. He could see the old-style exhaust stacks, the shape of the mirrors, the curve of the visor. Through the side window, the driver's profile was just visible, a strong jaw, dark stubble, eyes focused ahead. His own face from 25 years ago, if someone had held up a photo. For a heartbeat, their gazes met through the soft blur of glass and mist. The younger him lifted 2 fingers from the wheel in a small salute, the gesture he'd always given other drivers back then when passing at night. "You'll be all right," the voice said, softer now, as if moving away down a hall. "You made it this far. Don't stop before the good part." Then the CB hissed loud, a burst of static that made him wince. When it cleared, there was only the usual low, empty crackle. He looked left again. The passing lane was empty. No red clearance lights. No old red trailer. Just fog, thinning now by degrees, revealing the faint glimmer of wet pavement, and beyond it, the flat, open fields edging back into sight. Ahead, the sky had a texture again, a faint sprinkle of stars peeking through rents in the ground cloud. The white around him lost its density, becoming more like low mist than full enclosure. His headlights reached farther. The world felt less like a closed room and more like a space with edges again. Mile 310 rose out of the fog, reflective 310 catching his beams. He watched it slip past, aware that this too was a kind of marker inside him. By the time he reached the junction where 73 met the eastbound state highway toward his son's town, the sky above was a deep, clean black stitched with stars. The land on either side of the road lay in quiet, silvered fields. The green sign for the turnoff loomed up on the right. East 24, Grafton 42, Merów 68, Mero. The name of a town he'd said out loud, mostly in the context of someday. His hands moved almost without his permission. Signal on, speed easing. The truck's weight shifted as he took the off-ramp, tires humming a different tune on the newer asphalt. In the quiet that followed, as night fields replaced fog fields and the sky opened fully above him, he took his phone from the dash mount and glanced down at the contacts list during a straight stretch. The name stared back. Ben. He tapped it with a thumb that didn't quite feel like his own. The ring sounded impossibly loud in the cozy cab. Once, twice, 3 times. He almost thumbed end. On the 4th, the line clicked. A voice, groggy and wary, answered. "Hello?" "Hey, kiddo," Lyle said, his own voice sounding rough and older to his ears, but steady. "It's your old man. I'm out on 24 running light. Think I might be coming your way if that's all right." There was a pause. In it, the hum of the engine and the soft whistle of air around the cab became a kind of quiet music. Finally, his son exhaled. "You're driving at 2 in the morning?" he said, disbelief and concern tangled in the words. "Of course it's all right, just be careful. It's foggy out there sometimes." Lyle smiled, a small private curve of his mouth. "I've got help," he said. "Road's clearer than it's been in a long time." They talked, halting at first, then with slowly warming ease as the miles ticked by under a sky that seemed to stretch on forever. No grand reconciliations, no dramatic declarations, just the simple, ordinary cadence of 2 people letting each other in, a little at a time. Later, at truck stops and diners and in cabs idling under starlight, Drivers would swap stories about Low Prairie Cut, about the way the fog there sometimes seemed thicker than it had any right to be. Some swore they'd seen another truck pace them in the murk, paint just a shade too old, logo a style that hadn't been used in years. A few admitted, in the safety of shared coffee and fatigue, that they'd heard their own younger voices on the CB, offering advice they didn't know they'd needed. They called it a mirror mile, a place where the road's long memory folded back on itself just enough to let a driver see who he'd been and who he might still be if he chose. Most nights, it was just a stretch of foggy-prone pavement on Highway 73, nothing more. But on certain small-hours runs, when the ground cloud rose thick and the world shrank to the glow inside a cab, Low Prairie Cut became something stranger, quieter, and oddly kind of place where, for a few miles, the past and the present rode side by side until the fog lifted and the road and the life ahead opened out once more.